Welcome everyone, this is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. As I've shared with you earlier in some of my Twitter feed, social media, and Facebook, we're going to be doing a podcast series. This is episode 1 of that podcast series, and we're going to begin by really looking at what are systems, what is systems thinking, what is a military-industrial complex, innovation, the journey as an immigrant, for me from India to the United States, education, but really we're going to cover a number of topics, and this will hopefully be the beginning of a series of podcasts we'll do, which will go into any one of those topics in more depth. But I think going into each of these topics, but giving sort of the journey that I've gone through what I call growing up in India, then immigration, then education, and then innovation, really is a good way to start. In sort of supporting this in a conversation manner, I also have Marcelo Guadiana. Marcelo is a senior at UMass Amherst.
Yep, or UMass Boston.
I'm sorry, UMass Boston.
Yeah.
In political science and double major in political science and economics. And Marcelo has gone through a number of the documents on the invention of email. And so he's going to, hopefully be a good way of having a conversation here. So,
yep.
Marcelo, I'm going to just sort of start with sharing my journey, in India.
Yeah, definitely.
Look, I was born in India, and I was born in India at a time when there were 2 different Indias. In fact, probably 10 different Indias or 100 different Indias. Long before it went through all the modern, process that we see today.
When were you born again?
I was born in 1963, December 2nd, 1963. Interesting enough, I was born on December 2nd. My uncle, whose also name is Shiva, was born 25 years before me. And I have a nephew whose name is Shivaji, who was born 25 years after me. So 3 Shivas in the family.
And what does Shiva stand for again? A lot of people don't know.
Shiva is a god of creation and destruction. He's a very interesting figure because if you look at him, he has a trident in his hand. He also meditates. He lives in a graveyard when he meditates as an ascetic, but he also lives in heaven on Mount Kailash. So he traverses the underworlds as well as the heavens. It's very much like Hermes, the character in Greek mythology, or Mercury. So some people view him as a god of communication and also as a god of medicine. And it's very interesting sort of how my life has mirrored some of those 2 archetypes.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's, I guess for me, my journey also begins even further than India, probably in Burma. And then the reason that is so is my father grew up in Burma. In fact, he was born there. And that story even goes a little bit further. When I was growing up in India, I remember my great-grandfather. So I saw my great-grandfather as an amazing guy. He was, in some ways, to me, God incarnate. And I'll explain why. He was a guy who grew up, India has a caste system. I don't know if you're familiar with that. India has a caste system. We were considered low caste untouchables. My great-grandfather, when he was 13 years old, wanted to make his fortune. I mean, they were very poor. They'd live along the side of the river and eat certain fruits and vegetables that would grow in the river.
And the caste system was way worse back then, right? This is like...
obviously way worse. My mom talks about it when she'd go to the well, they would chase her away like Sudra. Sudra is like the N-word in India, and try to chase her away. You could only go to the well after the upper castes had taken their water. So it was totally, you talk about, segregation. It was at its worst. So my great-grandfather, at the age of 13, decides he wants to make his fortune. In those days, this is in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, people went to Burma. Burma was where entrepreneurs went, traders went, or people wanted to make their fortune. So he went, asked his younger brother for money to go on that slave ship. His older brother. On what's called one of these ships, not a slave ship. So his own brother wouldn't give him any money. So he said on that day, he spit on the ground in front of his brother, and he said, "You're no longer my brother." And he got on an indentured slave ship. What that means is you're basically an indentured servant, and you have to work off your bond over a period of 3 to 5 years sometimes. in repayment back for that trip from India to Burma. And if you look, it isn't that far.
Wow. So 3 years.
3 to 5 years.
Wow. Okay.
So he gets on the ship, and you have to work on the ship too.
Yeah.
And turns out the ship's captain was so impressed by his honorable work, his dedication, he let him out of his bond. He said, "I've never seen a guy like this. He's such a good human being."
Yeah.
So my grandfather in Burma does anything he can to make money. He makes what's called dosas, which are the Indian pancakes on the street. He cleans houses, anything he can. Probably had six, 7 jobs.
Yeah.
And little by little, he becomes he gets his own land. He starts farming. And he becomes a pretty substantial farmer in India. More and more land. He owned, I think, at one point, thousands of heads of cattle.
Is he still considered the very lowest caste?
Well, this was in 1900s.
Oh, okay.
This was, late 1800s, I'll come back to that caste question.
Yeah,
But this was, but in Burma, my grandfather and my grandmother are also born there. And my great-grandfather marries his wife, and my grandfather, not my great-grandfather, was, I think, 15 years old when he married my grandmother, who was 14, which you would call almost child marriage in those days. But they had my father when my grandmother was 14. So my dad is born to basically 2 teenage parents.
Yeah, that's
which was
insane.
Normal in those days.
If that was normal in India, wow. Okay.
And my dad was the first son of my great grandfather, which is like a lot of in the Indian tradition. The son of the son, the first son, has a lot of burdens on them, plus a lot of honor too.
Yeah.
Now my grandmother wasn't having any more kids. 1 year went by, 2 years. Now in those days, a woman was supposed to have lots of children. 8, 9 children was normal.
Yeah.
My grandmother was one of 16 children, the only daughter. Okay, 15 brothers, and my grandmother, my dad's mother.
Yeah.
So time goes by. It's 3 years, 4 years, and my grandmother isn't having any more kids. So my great grandfather, it was a tradition, was going to marry another woman to my grandfather. Now my dad was deeply upset. So was my grandmother. Now Burma is known for 2 things, if you don't know: cobras and Buddhism. Like there's a stupa Buddhist monastery everywhere, and cobras. Okay?
Why cobras?
It's just filled with cobras.
Oh, okay.
It's snakes everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So my dad and my grandmother, my grandmother's a deeply spiritual person, prayed and meditated. They start going to different temples to pray for a son or another child to be born, so my great-grandfather doesn't marry another woman to my grandfather.
Yeah.
Eventually they go to a Buddhist monastery and they see this Buddhist monk, and he gives my dad a coin. Inside of it a mantra. Mantra is a word that you repeat, and he tells my father, don't worry, start meditating. On this day you will have a brother born to you, December 2nd.
Yeah.
So my dad was, probably 3 or 4, whatever his age was, and he very devoutly starts meditating and praying. My grandmother would tell me how in a very devout way my father would sit in front of the deities and meditate. And so on December 2nd, as this monk had predicted, my uncle is born, whose name is Shiva.
Wow.
And that coin my uncle still wears on his chest because my father gave him, and inside of that still is that mantra. So the reason I shared that with you was my dad, so I grew up in this very deeply spiritual family. My great-grandfather would do all these what are called penances for others, right? My great-grandfather's view was very frugal, but he helped everyone, particularly when it came to education. He would give whatever money if anyone needed money for education. But when it came to running a household, he was extremely frugal. So this is all in Burma.
Yeah.
Now, what you may know is Burma was a center of World War II in the Far East.
Okay.
It was where the Japanese and the Americans were the center. Rangoon was at that point the capital of Burma. So World War II breaks out, and Burma becomes a hell zone.
Yeah.
I mean, destruction everywhere. So here my great-grandfather went with nothing, started accumulating wealth, owned land, all through sheer hard work. And overnight, all of this starts disappearing in the sense bombs, etc. They're living in foxholes, bombs dropping everywhere. I mean, literally bombs. They didn't know if they were going to live or die. A lot of people get bitten by cobras. Okay? Now,
so there's a higher chance of people getting bitten now.
Well, because I mean, it's chaos there. My great-grandfather would also meditate and pray, and he had my father go to a tree, which there were 2 cobras living, and he would have him leave 2 eggs. And as a penance, because remember, Shiva has a cobra around his neck, which we can talk about what that means, right? As an offering to the gods. So no one in their home ever got bit. That's a mysticism behind this. So the family, is dealing with this. Overnight, my dad was saying people would be walking around barrels of money. Inflation was skyrocketing. So my dad saw overnight a stable economy go to hell, how money became devalued. And my great-grandfather had this idea that he felt, let's all collect the sacks. They used to have these sacks, which were where you store potatoes, and they were everywhere. They're made of cloth.
Okay.
My great-grandfather had this view that when the war would end, those sacks would be worth a lot so they just collected all these sacks. No one would think about doing.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they end up being, that's when as the war ended, that's when they were able to cash that out and go back to India. Wow. And they literally were going to walk back to India. If you look what Burma is, you have to walk up to Assam and you have to come back down. And a lot of people did that route. My great-grandfather used to, again, meditate and pray. He had a vision that if they did that, they'd all die. And in fact, that's what happened. A lot of people died because there was a big bombing there. So they ended up taking a boat back to India, walked, some part of it, and they come back to their same village where my great-grandfather left. So my great-grandfather said, I left with nothing, I made a lot, and I came back with nothing. And he would say you can judge the character of a person by how they deal with those ups and downs in life.
Yep.
So my dad now comes back at the age of, I think he was 10 or 11, had never been exposed to a book, because this is, he'd gone through Burma during World War II, and he has to start studying and learning from scratch.
How old was he when he was?
I think he was around 10 or 11.
Okay.
Right?
So he remembers the war.
Oh, he remembers everything. I mean, we should talk to him, and he'll tell you details.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
He would say that they would literally be in foxholes, and people would shit in their pants. When he talks about shitting in their pants, it means
he still remembers that.
Yeah. People would, because it's scary when.
Yeah.
These huge, I mean, I can't even imagine it.
I can't imagine.
But my great-grandfather would leave out the foxholes and stand, he said, like a pillar and look at these planes, and he would say, no harm will come to you. He was a very devout person, total believer in God, and believed in the golden rule, etc. So my great-grandfather comes back, the family comes back, everyone comes back to India, and they have to basically start from scratch. And that home, which is a home. So I grew up in Bombay as a kid, very cosmopolitan, crazy, wild city with every religion. And I also grew up in that small village in deep South India, in that same home, which is still there. So my journey, my life in India was growing up with these amazing stories, meeting my great-grandfather, who, by the way, brought up my father. My grandfather was in some ways a young teenager.
Yeah.
He was out there banging other women.
Yeah.
He was like a Romeo. My dad say if you tied a sari to a tree, he'd go bang that.
And that was normal for 14, 15.
Well, he married, he was so young, and he was a good-looking guy. He was like, he's a tough.
But that was normal to get married at that age, at 14,
I think in those days it was.
It was.
In those days, people got married, after puberty, etc. So they ended up having 7 kids. My grandmother.
You have to grow up real fast.
Yeah. So they grew up. And then my mother's side, my mom was one of 9 kids, and we'll talk about her. But so you have my dad's family, grew up in Burma, came back, and you have to understand they were political too. In Gandhi, remember the Indian independence movement? India is not independent. This is pre-1947.
Okay, so this is when Gandhi was around, right?
Yeah. So the Indian independence movement was just starting.
Yeah.
Now, my family did not like Gandhi, my dad's side. They saw him as
Really?
like,
Okay.
yeah, and this is the interesting, everyone think Gandhi's his hero. There was another guy, an Indian leader called Subhash Chandra Bose. Subhash Chandra Bose, S-U-B-H-A-S, Chandra Bose, like Bose speakers. Subhash Chandra Bose was a very different leader. He was an Indian nationalist, a patriot. He said India never went through its nationalist cycle. We should kick out the British. Like America had a good nationalist revolution, India never had a nationalist revolution. And he was organizing the Indian National Army to kick out the British out of India.
Okay. So what was the difference between him and Gandhi?
Gandhi was essentially an apologist for British imperialism. And
Okay.
I'll talk more about this.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do a whole discussion, but Gandhi was essentially parachuted in by the British to quell the uprising of Indian nationalism. There was a deep Indian nationalism movement starting to build in the 20s. People are saying, wait a minute, we have a right to a nation, right? Why are these white men running over us? And there was a nationalist movement starting.
Yeah.
And by 1947, by the way, the British had decided to leave India. People don't know this. They had realized India was too hard to manage. Remember, the British were running all these empires, and
Yeah.
it's very costly. Like having that's why they got out of America, because they wanted to focus their energy on India. They exploited America. Now they wanted to move the exploitation to India.
Yeah.
There was more wealth they saw in India. So they were fighting battles on many fronts. Indian uprisings were taking place. And in fact, the document that India has Britain, it's not called the Declaration of Indian Independence. You know what it's called?
No, what is it called?
It's called the Transfer of Power. Okay?
Okay.
And it was a transfer of power. So India never, in my opinion, never got independence in 1947.
Yeah.
It got a transfer of power from white men with crowns to brown men with white hats. And they flew in this guy Gandhi,
Yeah.
talked some interesting stuff, to be the person who talked this nonviolent nonsense, right? To serve, to transfer. And he was an Anglophile. He loved the British.
Yeah, that's interesting.
He loved to bootlick the British. I mean, he thought they were the greatest thing, they blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Now, Subhash Chandra Bose is very different. He was a nationalist. He believed India needed a national identity. And so in Burma, Subhash Chandra Bose would go raise money because there was a lot of Indians. My family, even though they had whatever money they earned, they gave all of it to Bose.
So this guy was pretty famous.
He's very famous, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, his movement was building, and suddenly his plane disappears and crashes. And people say that Gandhi and Nehru, who were essentially Anglophiles, Nehru became the first prime minister, Gandhi's considered the founder of India, they blew up Bose's plane.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, it's interesting because Nehru was banging Mountbatten's wife. Mountbatten was the emperor of India, or whatever, the chancellor of India. He was running India.
Oh, okay. That's
And
a
Edwina
very good reason to
Mountbatten,
kill him.
and Edwina Mountbatten was banging Jawaharlal Nehru. Well-known
Okay.
fact. And Nehru becomes the first prime minister of India. So this whole thing was orchestrated.
Yeah.
So India never got Indian independence. But the point is, my parents were fighters. They weren't Gandhiites.
Yeah.
They were my dad's side of the family.
Well, there's a lot of things people have no idea about Gandhi, right? I mean, there's like the whole history behind him that they have no
Yeah,
clue.
I mean, we'll
Like,
do a
yeah,
whole series
yeah,
on that.
yeah.
We could do a whole podcast. One episode we should do is how one man sold the country.
Yeah.
The true life of Mahatma Gandhi, and how India suffered for that. Gandhi was very much into the caste system. He supported the caste system.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the reframing of Gandhi as a saint is not what he is. But Bose was a fighter, a warrior, who was building an elite force of the very smartest Indians, warriors.
And how old was he?
I think he must have been in his 30s, 40s.
His 30s,
He was a young guy.
That's when he died.
Yeah, when his plane blew up.
Yeah.
Disappeared. No one even. And there's all this folklore that Bose is still alive, and he's in it. Anyway, so that's the environment. So I grew up. By the way, my dad telling these stories of Subhash Chandra Bose, etc. And when I grew up in India, my grandmother, when she got back, right, here's a woman, and they got back into farming. So they grew cotton, they grew peanuts, subsistence farmers.
Yep.
My earliest memory of my great-grandfather is this man standing 6'2", skinny, ripped, muscular, and at the age of like in his late 80s, working out in the fields.
Yeah.
He lived a very simple life. He'd wake up at 4 in the morning. He would drink this water, rice water, which had a lot of B vitamins, and he'd go to work, go to bed early. He'd make his own food. And he would literally sleep on he was married, but he would sleep on a bench, a hardwood bench, and he'd meditate and pray. It's almost like an ascetic's life, truly devoted to something bigger, making sure. When he died, Marcelo, he called everyone together, and he said, "I'm leaving now." And he said, "Everything, I have no debts." He said, "If you need money, it's over there in that locker. We owe no one everything. We don't owe anyone anything." Yeah. He lived essentially a perfect life.
This is what he's saying the day before? Or?
No. And he said, "I'm leaving now."
Okay.
And he went into what we call a prayer lotus position, and then he left.
Wow.
Okay? And so they say you can judge someone, my great-grandfather used to say, by how they die. The essence they leave when they die. Do they leave with a smile on their face? And by the way, most people shit when they die. Nothing. So he was considered like a saint. And to me, as I say, if there was a God, if I've ever seen it, was him, in the sense of how he lived his life. Pure truth, a real sense of love for people. Not this namby-pamby love, but he walked the walk. That was my great-grandfather. So he's still probably my greatest hero. So my dad was brought up by him. And so here's my dad in Mohur, which is a small village in deep South India. At the age of 10, 11, he has to start getting educated. The local school teacher is what I would call a true communist. Communist Party in India was there.
Yeah. And
he educates my father under a mango tree. The old style, teaches him math and physics, first principles. So my dad could derive. My dad's an amazing mathematician and a chemist still, and physicist. He could still derive everything because all they had was a chalk and a blackboard, little blackboard. So my dad eventually ends up becoming an engineer, which is unheard of that he pulled that off. He has 6, 7 other siblings. He educates us. In those days, the first son was responsible for educating everyone below him. So he has to making sure everyone got married and settled. It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
So that was my dad's sort of thing. And I saw in that village my grandmother, whenever I go to the village, I spent at least a third of my life there. She was a farmer, worked 15, 16 hours a day in the fields. These weren't like, when I mean farmer, they're not owning factory farms. They're out there planting rice with leeches on their feet, coming home, cooking, everything. But on weekends, my grandmother was a village healer. And this is not your typical grandmother. My grandmother chewed tobacco and beetle stuff. She had tattoos all over her arms. And she would channel different deities. She would do deep prayers and sadhanas, as we say it in Hinduism. Sadhanas are deep penances, like Jesus going and fasting for 40 days. They would do these deep penances to really pay homage to God. In the home of my grandmother's small house was every deity. You had Shiva, you had Lakshmi, you had Jesus. In Hindu culture, we consider Jesus a son of God.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he is an avatar of God. We consider him as God. So we call him Yesudas, right? So I grew up in this very deeply spiritual environment. 2 doors down was the Indian temple. And my grandmother, I'd lie on her lap as a kid, and she'd tell me these most amazing epic stories. See, in the Indian tradition, you have these amazing mythologies of the great Ram, who was known as the most honorable warrior, who was so honorable that the kingdom, he was the first son, was supposed to be coming to him. But his father had a mistress, and he'd had another son with another woman, and he had promised that woman the kingdom. Now Ram could have fought for that, Rama, but because he was honoring his father, his father told him the mistake he had made, and Rama said, Father, you have made that mistake, but I'm your son, so fine, my half brother could have the kingdom. And that brother banishes Rama and his wife into the woods for 14 years. So Rama and Sita get banished into the forests. And then there's a whole epic called the Ramayana. It's an amazing story. Yeah. How Rama's wife gets stolen by an evil king in Sri Lanka, what's now known as Lanka. Rama has to fight. and he wins, and he comes back, and he's victorious. So
when did these stories originate? Like,
in India, they go back thousands of years. In fact, they're seen as real stories.
Yeah.
Rama's closest friend was Hanuman, who's a monkey god, who's an incarnation, who has Shiva's spirit in him. He's a fighter. And Hanuman helps Ram win back his wife from this evil king. So, I learned about loyalty, honor, right? Fealty, doing what's always right. And my grandmother told me story after story like this. So I grew up around these, that's what my brainwashing was,
Yeah.
If you want to think, this stories of fighting for right, and that there is something beyond this world, and then you have to live a good life. Now, my mother grew up in a very different environment. My mother grew up also as an untouchable, low caste person. The father left the family, ran off with the maid. Okay, when she was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. My mom loved her father. She said how her dad would tuck her in and tell her stories, and the maid was in the house, and now it's interesting, in these cultures people may have a mistress, but the father actually not only ran off but married the maid.
Yeah.
Which was considered a love marriage. So in India, you had the typical marriage was you honored your family, and it was an arranged marriage. Your family chose your bride, and that was norm, right? Because you honored them, it was a perpetuation of your culture, etc. But the fact my grandfather left his wife, and my mom was one of 9 kids, overnight, and they literally lost their home. The 9 kids were split up. I think 5 kids went with my grandmother, and the other 4 went somewhere else. So it was and my mom...
They went with your dad or just somewhere else?
Somewhere else, because they didn't have enough space. I think they were in school. Some of them were in school, in boarding, some other school. I don't know what it was. But the point my mother would tell me was it was such a shame. You see, divorce is unheard of in the Indian culture.
Yeah.
And not only does this divorce, the father runs away. So when she would go to school, people say, "Do you have a father?" And she would basically be completely embarrassed.
Yeah, wow.
So she grew up with this intense shame that she had done something wrong. But she said she decided that she was going to be one of the most good people, right? She said my father was, he was led down the path of wrongdoing. And so she decided as a young kid that she was going to get educated, which was unheard of. A woman, low caste woman, like she wanted to not just get a college degree, but she wanted to get a graduate degree.
Yeah, back then.
It was well. First of all, women were supposed to just get married, and that's it.
Yeah.
So my mom's older brother was a pretty incredible guy, smoked like a chain smoker, and he ended up becoming an economist. And he loved his younger sister. My mother was the youngest daughter, and he made sure she did get educated. Okay. So my mom gets educated, not only gets a bachelor's in math, but a master's in statistics. Statistics is a very difficult field.
Yeah.
And I think she's still to this day one of the only women or the few women who still graduate in that. So that was my mom, came from nothing, pure will to succeed. My dad, same thing. And then both of them met in Bombay because my mother's brother interviewed my father for a job. And he said, are you looking for a good wife? And my dad tells a story that, he was beating his head because he was coming of age to have a wife. And he said his father had introduced him to an amazingly attractive woman. And another woman who was really wealthy, but not that good looking, and not that smart. And then he met my mom, who was pretty good looking, but she was really bright. So he wanted to marry, he decided he was going to marry my mother, but someone said, do you know she comes from a broken family? Now that's like the curse of death.
Yeah.
So my dad's like, what the hell? I can't marry her. Like, it'll call shame on me. She comes from a father who left them, a divorced family. I mean, this is like at a time when that's seen like coming out of the closet.
Yeah.
Or worse than that. So his father, my grandfather, was quite nice. He goes, look, you cannot judge her by the sins of her father. Judge her for what she did. Look what she's gone through. Now, this was a big, big thing for my father to do.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is your great-grandpa telling you?
No, my grandfather.
My
grandfather.
Sorry,
And my great-grandfather loved my mother. He loved her resilience, how hard she worked. So anyway, my dad and my mom get married in Bombay. They worked their butts off. My mom became the head of the math department at a school. My dad became an engineer to a guy called Gopala Singhania, who's one of the biggest industrialists of India. So you have these two very interesting people, total mutations, who meet, get married, and I come from that. And when I was born in Bombay, it was an interesting journey because me and my sister is older. She was born. My mom when my mom had me, there's some illness. I still haven't figured out what it was. But my dad came to the hospital, convinced me and my mom were going to die, and he made his prayers. In those days, he was working in a manufacturing job. He had to leave. He couldn't. It was so like he's making ends meet. Yeah. So he prayed and he had to go back to work. But he thought we were dead. And somehow
your mom being pregnant, right?
Yeah. Well, no, but I was born. Apparently, I was fine after I was born. It was after a few days later.
He thought both of you were.
Yeah. So it was an interesting that whole piece to hear that, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say, Marcelo, is the fact that I guess my parents met, being even born in that environment, right? Being born to those huge parents, probably 1 in a trillion, if you think about it. Two low caste untouchables who meet, came from these very tough backgrounds, right? So I grew up in Bombay. I was there until 2nd grade, and I also grew up in this village. So I had these two extreme worlds: Bombay city, the back of where we were living in the city. Yeah. But then when my dad got an opportunity to come to the United States, he was invited by Unilever, which is one of the big consumer packaged goods companies, for training here. When he came here, they found out that he actually could train them. He knew more than any of the engineers there, so they invited him to stay here. But my dad was very loyal to his boss in India. He said, "I'm not going to do that." He goes, "I'll finish my tenure there, ask my boss for his blessings, and then I'll come." And his boss said, "Shiva Ayyadurai, you should go." My dad's name is Ayyadurai. My name's Shiva in India. By the way, you don't have last names. It's like the American Indian culture.
Oh,
there's just a one
okay.
name. So my dad's name is Ayyadurai, and he told my dad he should come. And so my dad decides to come to the United States, and he had to come first. And in those days, it was merit-based immigration. You had to submit your resumes, and then you got your green card and all that. We had to wait about a year, and when we were waiting about the year, we moved to a suburb of Bombay where the backwoods were a jungle. I mean, a real jungle. Huge snakes. I mean, so it was like Mowgli. I'd walk in the backyard. My next door neighbor loved animals. And it was, thinking back, I mean, that's why when you walk in Indian woods, you're always looking, you're going to get bitten by a snake.
Yeah.
And I still look at that when I walk in the woods here. I'm thinking if a snake's going to get me, it's something deep. But that was the India I grew up in. And then a year later, my sister, me, and my mother came. And we left India literally on my 7th birthday, December 2nd, 1970. We landed in the United States on December 5th, 1970. In those days, it used to take a long time to come. We went to London. It wasn't like a direct flight, right? And especially we took the economy tickets.
Yeah, long journey.
Yeah, so you're looking at, we came to India to the United States in 1970. So think about 1970. Vietnam War is going on. You have the counterculture movement, bell bottoms, hippies, drugs, and you have this war raging in Vietnam.
Yeah, and this is what you're introduced to.
This is what we're introduced to. And we come from India to Paterson, New Jersey, which is another wild place.
Okay.
Ford Galaxies, huge, have you ever seen those huge cars?
Yeah.
Predominantly all African Americans. Okay. And I start going to 2nd grade. They're very tough. People would pick on me because no one had seen an Indian kid.
Really?
Yeah.
How many Indian people do you think were in
0.
Oh, you were the only one?
Only one.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And my parents were very much into education. My mom was working at a mill doing quality assurance testing. My dad was working at a company called ChemSpray, which was a company that used to do filling for cosmetics. He's a cosmetic chemist. And then my mom would also start taking like 3 trains to start learning computer programming in those days.
Was that a popular thing to learn computer?
Very new.
Yeah.
This concept of COBOL on big mainframes.
Okay.
So my mom was doing work, and then whatever money they made, then we moved to the next town called Clifton.
Okay.
Clifton, New Jersey. So 2nd grade through 4th grade was in Clifton. And I grew up in a place where the landlord was from Italy, and he was very tough, very tough landlord, but he taught me to landscape. Like I would mow the lawn, and I would cut, he taught me how to do perfect work. I learned how to do some painting with him. My mom had Yugoslavian friends. I started doing, I think I started doing, learning painting, house painting. And the school was literally across the street. And then we moved from there to another home, which was owned by another huge big fat Italian woman who had a dog on the 2nd floor. And we had those wood stoves. We had no heat. You had to literally get coal.
You're in another school again?
No, same school,
same school,
different. We moved to another house.
Yeah.
Rent was cheaper. And then we moved to Parsippany, New Jersey, between 5th grade to 8th grade. And that's where major things occurred to me, because that's when between 5th and 8th grade, something important happened. In 7th grade, we moved to Parsippany, and I had a chance to go back to India in 1975. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was dying.
Okay.
And so we went back. Me and my mom went back, and that's when I realized the difference between America and India.
Yeah.
When I go back to the village, and I see, oh my God, I thought it was normal. People, my grandparents literally lived in this one building home. My aunt lived in a hut, literally a hut with thatch roof. And so in my whole family, you could see the spectrum of diversity of incomes.
Yeah.
And now I'm 12, I decided, something is not right in this world, that I wanted to make a difference. That it didn't seem right why some people had a shitload of stuff.
Yeah.
And other people had nothing.
Yeah.
And they had to suffer so much. And so this 12-year-old kid, I was there, I think 3 months, and I'm leaving, and I stayed with my grandparents because I had a deep connection with my grandmother. And I'm leaving, they come to the train station. I can still remember the scene. And these were caboose trains. We're talking about old caboose trains you had to take to the village. You'd have to take the caboose train, and you take a cycle rickshaw and a bullock cart, okay, to get into the village.
Yeah.
And my grandparents come to see me off, and they're crying, and I realized how deeply these people loved me and how much they had suffered, right? From Burma to here to create my father, right? You just sort of, and I realized that I was going to do something significant, that it would be, like, I was so fortunate.
Yeah.
Like, these people came from nothing.
And this is when you were around 12 years old,
12
right?
years
Yeah.
old. And before I left India, my grandparents trained me. They gave me diksha, it's called, where they give you a mantra, a charged word. And they taught me how to meditate. And that's when I learned that you could, basically the meditation is you learn how to visualize, you have a mantra, you visualize stuff in what's called your third eye. It's one of the siddhis, they call, one of the things that you learn to create what you want. So I learned how to do this. I went into a total faith.
At the age of 12, really?
At the age of 12. So I started meditating. So when I came back, my mom said, you need to do something significant. And in the high school I'd moved to, again, we were the only, junior high school, I was the only Indian kid. Me and my sister. And my mom said, you need to, you should excel in mathematics. Like, be the #1 kid. So the teacher I had in 8th grade had a system. Very nice, amazing teacher. He'd been there 30 years, and he gave you, and because I was good, I got into the advanced math course, and the way he laid out the course was, he had the standard curriculum which he'd teach you but then when you did problems, you could go beyond those problems and you could start learning on your own. And I knew there was a math award given in that 8th grade class.
Yeah.
So I would, by the way, I was not just a nerd. I played soccer. I was a pitcher on the baseball team.
Yeah.
So I'd come home at around 8 p.m. from practice, and then I'd study from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. I did shitloads of problems.
Yeah.
So
this is like advanced math, right?
Yeah. So he had the standard curriculum, and then he gave you these advanced problems.
Yeah.
I was doing nonlinear programming, which you only do as a PhD. at MIT in
That's
operations
crazy.
research.
And you were enjoying doing this?
I loved it. I loved it, and it was competitive.
Yeah.
So I blew away everyone. So the end of the year comes, and I had been visualizing in my meditation that there would be a audience, and I would go up to the stage and I received this award. And I swear to God, Marcelo, that exact same thing plays itself out.
Really?
Like a movie.
Did you know what award it was?
The math award.
The math. Oh,
yeah,
the
and
math
I
award, yeah.
visualized the whole thing.
Yeah.
So what was interesting was, now my mom's the one who compelled me to win this, right?
Yeah.
And I did it many ways for her, to honor her. 2 days before the award ceremony, the graduation of 8th grade, which is junior high school, ends, my mother gets into a massive accident. We thought she was dead. She was in the ICU. Okay?
Car accident?
Massive car accident. Someone hit her from behind, all her teeth knocked out. It was very sad.
Yeah.
So me and my dad go to that ceremony, and I had heard I'd won some award. You know, they don't tell you, it's like the Oscars. And I go there, and Mr. Summer, who was the amazing teacher, he gets up, and he goes, you know, typically every year we give the award to 2 students, the winner and a runner-up. But he goes, this year, there is no runner-up. He goes, Shiva, in my 32 years, Shiva blew away anything I've ever seen. And he goes, there is no runner-up. And he gives me this award. I go up, it's a standing ovation. And I also won the science award, because when you start doing good at one thing, I also won another award. And
this standing ovation, this is a visualization.
I visualized the whole thing, everything.
Yeah.
It was like a movie was being played. It was like I'd move forward in time.
Yeah.
Now, when me and my dad it was sort of bittersweet because my mom wasn't there. We're leaving the auditorium, and this was also somewhat of a Jewish town. And unfortunately, Jewish people have this thing, they're the chosen people of God. No one else is smarter. So, and the friend of mine was this kid, Eric Greenberg. And he didn't work that hard. So Eric's mother comes running up to me, angry. And he starts screaming at my father, your son has done nothing great.
This is while you're going through your mom's car accident.
Yeah, and we're about to go to see we're leaving the auditorium. My son could have done that if he worked harder. And I was looking at this woman very, like just shocked.
Yeah.
That she was so upset, jealous,
yeah.
That an Indian kid had done this, and you could see that it was this...
Talking about racism, right? Like,
it's a form of racism.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a town where the Jewish kids, the parents would send their kids to Israel, and these kids would come back indoctrinated. We have to kill all the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And that they were the chosen people.
Yeah.
And you could see that. And I was very shocked by this. But not just shocked. I wasn't frankly shocked. I was like, this woman was childish.
Yeah.
Like that, it was even shocked. I mean, I still remember that scene. Okay? As much as I remember another scene when I was 5 years old in India, where I had a friend and I went to his home, and the mother says, you can't come in. You have to stand outside and I'll give you water in a different glass. And she said, you're Sudra.
Yeah.
It's like the
lower caste.
Yeah. Like the nigger word.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's when I asked my mother, what is this? She goes, well, that's what we are. And she told me, but the anger, the sadness I felt when I was 5 years old, it was a different kind of sadness. This time I felt sadness for this stupid woman.
For her, yeah.
For her, like,
yeah.
Why did your son didn't work hard?
Yeah.
And why are you yelling at my father when he brought me up to work hard?
Yeah.
I worked hard and you're screaming.
He was yelling at your father. Like,
she was yelling at my father.
Not,
my son could have done better had he worked hard.
Was she mad at you as well, you think?
Well, she was, this is nothing. She was so upset.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that, right? It's this great honor, and you get this. It's an interesting karmatic thing of my life, you'll see. So we go to see my mother after that, and we didn't even, she was just happy, but she was in pain. She'd lost her front teeth. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, it does sound sad.
So that was 8th grade, okay? Now, that next year, we transfer to one of the wealthiest school systems in New Jersey. So think about Patterson was pretty much African American, Clifton was working class, Parsippany was working class, somewhat wealthy Jews, and then we go to Livingston, which is all predominantly Jewish.
This is you kind of experiencing the whole American, the American dream, pretty much, right? Going
exactly.
And
ladder, then we go to Livingston, and the homes are bigger. My parents, had sort of whatever money they had, they bought a home, because they wanted to be in that better neighborhood.
Yeah.
It was known as the best school system. So my 8th grade teacher had written to the 9th grade teacher, who turned out to be someone he went to college, the ninth grade principal.
Okay.
So in Livingston it was 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, right? So 9th grade was still junior high school. And he said, Shiva's an extraordinary student. And the 9th grade, I had gone through all their math classes, advanced to the only class left for me was in the high school, which was calculus, which you again take only in college.
Yeah.
It was an advanced placement calculus class. So I'm only, whatever, I think 14 at that time. So because Mr. Summer knew Dr. Rowell, I mean, these names are coming back, he respected him, and they arranged a special bus for me that would transport this kid to the high school. My sister was 2 years ahead of me in high school.
Yeah.
And I was in the calculus class with seniors. And I aced it, okay?
Wow.
The #1 student then. But Marcel, I just used to work my ass off, man. I used to do a ton of problems. It wasn't like I was just smart.
Yeah. You understood.
I understood you had to work.
Yeah.
And I would still meditate, and I still knew how to do goal setting. And I still do that to today. Visualization,
yeah,
goal setting. This is what I want to achieve.
They've done studies on that. How they've done studies on how important that is.
Yeah, yeah. It's every successful person I found out later does this.
Yeah.
So I finished calculus, and this is now 9th grade. I'm 14 years old. It's a summer. There's no more math courses for me, even in the high school level. So there's a very interesting independent study teacher that shows up, who wants to help me. She organizes where I can study linear algebra on my own pace with a special high school teacher. And in the summer between 9th and 10th grade, something interesting happened. My mom was doing computer programming, and she had a coworker. My mom was working in Newark at this medical school, was known as University of Medicine and Dentistry. She had a coworker called Marty Feuerman. And Marty brings this little newspaper article from the Washington Square Times. He lived in Washington Square, where New York University is, in Soho,
yeah.
What is now. And he said, hey, there's this professor at NYU who's going to select 40 students to learn computer programming at NYU. This was unheard of for young kids.
At the 70s.
In the 70s.
Yeah.
And this is like 1977, 78, where a computer would fill up, a huge room,
yeah.
Right? Massive. And 40 students were selected, but you had to be a junior or a senior. Now, I'm between freshman and sophomore year, so I wasn't even eligible to apply. So I applied. Mr. Summer writes me a letter. Mr. Krimmel, who's my calculus teacher, and they said, we've never seen a student like this. There's, in 32, I mean, very amazing letters. So I get accepted out of one of the 40 kids in the United States. And this is, I'm 14.
Were you like interested in computer science, or was this a thing you wanted to do?
Well, yeah. I go to NYU, and this was at the Koran Institute of Mathematical Sciences. This is like one of the most elite of the elite. This is like where the Putnam exam, like you have the Nobel Prize, there's a thing called the Putnams,
okay,
where the Nobel Prize equivalents in math go. By the way, I don't know if you know, there's no Nobel Prize given in math. You know that, right?
Oh, I didn't know that.
The reason is that I think Alfred Nobel's daughter ran away, eloped with a mathematician. So Alfred Nobel hated that, so there's no Nobel Prize in math.
Just because he hated that?
Yeah. So anyway, he gave it in every other field.
Yeah.
So NYU is in the middle heart of New York City. We live in Livingston. So my dear mom would get, and you had to be there at 8 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m. for the first, and it was an intensive military, like Navy SEAL program.
It was like during the summer when you were
summer,
at school,
and you would learn 7 programming languages: BASIC, Snowball, COBOL, ArtSpeak, which is a graphical programming language, PL1, Fortran, digital circuit theory, where we draw the circuits in those days, like chip design. So my mom would drop me off at the train station in Newark, the PATH trains.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And you take them all the way into, I think, Bleecker Street, and you have to switch train to go into... and I did this as a 14-year-old kid. Unheard of. Parents are afraid to send their kids anywhere.
Yeah.
When I was taking that train back and forth, by the way, second day when I took that train, I'm literally walking down Bleecker Street, and 3 guys come smashing through a window. They just stolen the jewelry. and cops start chasing. Now, this was New York. In those
Yeah,
days.
New York during those days was pretty dangerous.
Yeah, it's pretty dangerous. And you walk
now.
through Washington Park.
Yeah.
Massive amount of drugs. People say try before you buy. Now, as
This
I'm
is you 14 years old.
14 years
this.
old.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's funny.
And as I'm walking through, taking the train, with my I'd have a little briefcase. But I also played summer soccer. It wasn't just a nerd.
Yeah.
This big black guy was watching this. His name was Jenkins. And he said, hey, man, you shouldn't be doing this alone. And he ended up becoming my bodyguard for that whole summer. And he was a foundry worker. He worked in a bronze foundry. And he took me where he would people would come up with molds. He would make these big molds. He would pour. It was pretty wild seeing molten bronze being poured. And people making these casts. It was wild.
Yeah. So he had no relation to the program at NYU?
Nothing. It was just this random guy. He lived in Newark. I mean, most people probably, in those days be afraid of him, but he ended up becoming my friend. He used to come home for Christmas. Ended up becoming a great guy,
Yeah, like a mentor kind of in a way.
Yeah, more like this very loving friend
Yeah.
who just wanted to make sure this kid wouldn't get hurt. Like it was a big brother. So I graduated. So Henry Mullish was the professor who'd set up this program. He'd gotten, I think, an NSF grant for 40 kids. And this was an amazing course, man. I mean, you learned programming, intensive, and these were the best of the best students out of New York's like Stuyvesant High School, all over the country. And I graduated #1. In fact, I won an award there.
You graduated #1
out of those 40.
Out of those 40.
And that was denoted by the fact they had the honors. So you'll see the certificate says honors. And I also won. Henry Mullish in those days was very much into programming calculators. And one of the programming courses where, in those days you didn't have Photoshop, but we programmed beautiful artwork. And I did this amazing artwork. And I won an award also for that. And the artwork we still have.
So you were like super competitive.
Very competitive. Yeah. I was super competitive. I was an athlete.
Yeah, that's true.
And I wanted to be #1 because excellence. I figured if you worked hard, you could achieve that. And I believed in excellence.
Yeah.
I believed it was such an honor to have this because every time I came home, I had deep respect for my great-grandfather. That's who I'd meditate to, and honor my grandfather, my mother, my father. I honored them because I saw they came from nothing, Marcelo.
Yeah.
And when I could not forget 12 years old, my grandparents crying and where they came from. I said, I have to do something significant.
Yeah.
That who else is given these opportunities? Like I don't have to live in a hut.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about being bitten by leeches and stuff, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, seeing that is so crucial. It really.
Yeah, my grandfather suffered.
Yeah.
He was an indentured servant. Like it was almost this level of, I don't want to say guilt, but if I don't do greatness, that I'm just a leech.
Yeah. Well, most Americans never get to see that, right?
No. So I just saw myself like I would be a leech, and that's why my sister got into drugs, and she was trying to be more American, meaning quote unquote trying to please people.
Yeah,
getting wasted.
70s. Yeah, that
It
makes sense,
was really just. I ended up becoming, as a 14-year-old kid, my parents wouldn't sleep until 3 a.m. I would have to go counsel them. I became an adult.
Why wouldn't they sleep till 3?
Well, they would say, "Oh my God, what's going to happen to our daughter?
She was out. Yeah.
She's out. She's getting. This was unheard of for traditional Indian parents.
Yeah, I see.
Should we go back to India? Why did we do coming here? This country's filled with drugs.
Yeah, this is the 70s, right? This is what people have to understand. Yeah.
And so it was at home. I worked extra hard to make sure my parents felt that their coming to America was not in vain.
Okay.
Because my sister was such a fuck up.
So that's where some of that competitive drive came from then.
Well, it was competitive to make my parents feel better.
Yeah.
To honor them because they suffered so much, and I saw my sister as completely spitting on them by her behavior.
At such a young age, you thinking that's so significant. That's
huge. So I just thought it was wrong. Yeah. But I would have to console them, right? Like, what should we do with Uma?
And that would be like, Dad, Mom, it's okay. Like a lot of people are doing.
Well, no, we talk. Okay, we should. Anyway, it was a whole. That was a whole dynamic. It's a whole nother podcast. Okay, about the dynamics of integrating into American culture.
Yeah.
me being the son, what I had experienced, and this sort of carrying the weight of this, my parents and what they'd suffered, right? Like the whole thing was, if I didn't do well, I felt like I was dishonoring them and all those, that whole generation of people who struggled.
Your grandpa,
and all those people in the village, and basically it's honoring their suffering. Marcelo, I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. A lot of people don't conceptualize that.
So I that's who I saw. I would just see my great grandfather in those fields. I mean, he would pound rice so hard that he would start splitting up blood. Okay, I mean, these people, when you talk about sweat and blood, and that's how we got money to send my dad to school.
Yeah, that's how you got in that position.
Exactly. So I could see a direct connection between their suffering and the fact that I was getting food, you know? And I could never forget that.
Yeah.
So, and I could never forget my teachers, Mr. Summer, Mr. Roth, who trained me, my coaches. You see, like, these people were working class people. Tony, who taught me how to, or this Yugoslavian people who taught me how to paint. These people are immigrants who had freaking nothing.
Yeah.
Just sheer hard work. So I had huge value for labor and hard work. That's why I hate people who are lazy, man. I just have or people who don't keep things clean. Not because of OCD, but you don't respect what the hell you have. I mean, even in India, you go to a hut, people would keep their place clean.
Yeah, they don't appreciate
organized. Yeah, because that's all they had. They valued what they had. It's that value of honoring life in many ways, that every moment matters.
I see, yeah.
So
it's very profound.
Yeah. So here I finish at the top of the class, and now I have to come back to 10th grade. Okay.
What is there left for you to do?
What's there left for me to do? I go to a Christmas party, I think in the summer of 77 or something, 78, or 77, I think. It was a Christmas party. Or somehow, I know I had met my mom in 77 at a Christmas party, introduced me to Dr. Michelson. And he goes, oh, you know, because he knew I was good at math, we'll figure out some project to do for you. He was a cool guy, 35-year-old guy, Brookhaven experimental particle physicist, sharp guy. And he was willing to take a risk. He like, people who are intelligent recognize other people are smart or hardworking. So that next year, in 78, there was this high school independent studies teacher. Some thought she was like wild, Stella Oleksiak, and she said, Shiva is smart. He can't, like, what course do we offer? Math. We should set up an independent study. So Dr. Michelson offered me the opportunity to be a research fellow at Rutgers, what is now known as Rutgers Medical School, then was known as the University of Medicine Dentistry. And he said, we'll figure out a project for you, okay?
This is something like the college students are doing, and you're doing at 10th grade, yeah.
Yeah, so 10th grade. And remember, then I have to get down to Newark. Livingston to Newark is around 30 miles away. So Stella Oleksiak has to go petition the superintendent of schools. They didn't initially want to do it. Mel Klein is still alive. He's 80 some odd years old. He agrees. So I get the right to leave in the middle of school because I had some humanities courses, and go travel. I took the bus all the way down to Newark. And even if you go down to Newark, it's still a ghetto around there.
Yeah, it really
and you have to take that after you get off the bus. You can get mugged, and I was cool, man, because I never saw these. I saw these people as my friends.
Yeah.
Walk through the parking lot. People get their cars scratched and all that, and into the medical school, C630 medical school building, MSB, still there, and in room C630 was where Dr. Michelson gave me a challenge. And the challenge was, we knew there was this thing called the inter-office mail system. In fact, Dr. Michelson, would you like to create an electronic mail system?
Yeah, it's him, the doctor.
Yeah, and I said, yeah, and I didn't know what the hell he said. And the next, I went home and I thought, this is how weird those two words, electronic and mail, were juxtaposed. I didn't know because I knew he was a physicist. I thought it was going to be, we're going to take a piece of paper and vaporize it into plasma particles, transport it over wire, and recreate it like the Star Trek transporter.
Yeah.
Electronic mail that no one had heard,
Yeah.
That's how it was. And then he said, we have this thing called the inter-office mail system. And in room, say, 630, he had a secretary. And on her desk was this thing called an inbox, a physical metal box another box called an outbox, another thing called a draft. She had 3 boxes. Behind her were these file folders. Under her was a trash can, and on her desk was this typewriter, and she had whiteout. Okay, she had paper clips, and you would see him, for example, dictate an email to her. He'd say, I forget her name, Janet, whatever, take this note. She'd type it. She'd leave it in the drafts. He'd come with a felt tip red pen. He'd mark it up. She'd retype it. He'd leave it in the drafts, and he goes, that's final, right? And these letters had a very particular structure. They always had the logo of UMDNJ on top, the word plus, then the word memorandum plus. So it looked like the header. And then you'd have 2, the name of the person. Sometimes you did multiple names. You'd put from, your name. The CC was literally, so if I was going to hire you, Marcelo, I would write a letter to Dr. Michelson. Dear Dr. Michelson, I would like to hire Marcelo B2 from Shiva. And maybe I wanted to CC 2 other coworkers, right? So I'd put CC Bill and Bob, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe I wanted to BCC his boss to let him know I was doing this. But those CCs, BCC or CC, literally meant a carbon copy. So when the secretary was doing that, she would have to write the memo, put a piece of carbon paper, put another bond paper, and type. So for each CC, you had to do a typing.
Okay.
Right? And you'd have to repeat it and repeat it. And then sometimes you would have, let's say in your case, I was hiring you, I would say, and then I would attach your resume and you'd put the paper clip and you put it in these envelopes, these big, I think 10-inch by 14-inch envelopes, and you tie it with this thing, and then you'd send it to all those people. And sometimes you could also send by registered mail. So if I was sending to certain people, I want to make sure they got it, I'd get a little pink receipt back.
Okay.
Okay?
So it was a form of communication back then, pretty much.
It's the inter-office mail system.
Yeah, the inter-office
it was the way people collaborated. Because if I was going to hire you, it would go to all those people, and they would make notes. It would come back to me, and I'd look at it.
Yep, okay.
Okay? And all this was done through paper. If I was doing a grant application, you may have 20 people. People would put little notes, and it would come back, okay?
Yeah, this is like the secretary's job, right? So
the secretary was a point in every office of the center of the inter-office mail system.
Okay.
Okay, but it's many features. You have to file, you have folders, you have a particular way that memo looked. To, from, subject, CC, body, the paperclip, attachment, etc., registered mail. Sometimes you did a broadcast mail, what you would call email marketing, a newsletter. You'd put to a whole bunch of people. You also had to be able to handle groups. They had this big, thick thing called the address book. You had it not only by people's names and addresses, but you also had groups, pharmacology, all the people in pharmacology, surgery. So you should also be able to do, sometimes you have to do a letter to surgery.
Yeah.
And then the memo would go to, so you'd have to copy that on a mimeograph machine, okay? So it was marketing, you see, and all those pieces. It's a very complex system.
Yeah, that's not simple at all.
Now, Dr. Michelson challenged me to replicate this entire system. It's a system. This is a key here. And in those days, mini computers were just coming. And you have to understand, we had 3 sites of the university. One was in Newark. Another facility was at that time in Piscataway. Another one was in New Brunswick, different parts of New Jersey.
Yep.
Dr. Michelson had set up the network. This wasn't the ARPANET or internet. This was, you don't need those guys. People used to set up their own networks.
Yeah.
He had a mini computer, which was a mini mainframe computer in Newark, in that lab, C630. He had one in New Brunswick, and he had one in Piscataway.
Yep.
Okay? Those 3 locations. Those 3 locations had all of these 3 computers, but each mainframe had terminals hanging off of it. So in Newark, we had the mini computer / mainframe there, and I think there were like 4 terminals there, in Piscataway, etc. So people were using these computers. Dr. Michelson had built this 3 network infrastructure for what he calls scientific data processing. He was very much into instrumentation. Remember, scientists in the labs were starting to collect data, like from EKGs, patient data, and he was building applications for them, like graphing someone's data, doing statistics. So you would come to the terminal, on the terminal, on that local would be running a statistical application. So if you were a doctor, you did time sharing. You paid him, which eventually went to the hospital, a certain fee for using that computer, and he had different apps, like you could run a statistical application. And he had people who were building these applications.
Okay.
He had a senior in college who's building this application for doing bar charts and graphs on these plotters. Okay? And it was called Grapher, Grphr. Because you can, by the way, you can only have 5 characters in the Fortran language he was programming in. This will come back.
Yeah.
So Michelson asked me to do this project, and so.
So he wanted you to do this all electronically, right?
Electronically, convert that entire system to the paper-based system. And so I was given a lot of freedom, but the most important thing was I learned who my customer was. My customer was those secretaries.
Yeah.
Those secretaries were my customer. And these were everyday people who had never seen a freaking computer. Remember, the people who used computers in those days, Marcelo, were Dr. Michelson wore literally a white lab coat. He was 35. Phil Goldstein was a 60-year-old physicist. He used to wear his tie, his lab coat. He worked on computers, writing science. Bob Field was another programmer. Dave Ritacco was I think a PhD graduate student there, okay? Or a graduate student.
Yeah.
So these were the quality of people, really smart people. Michelson recruited. But one of the things Michelson taught me was he was into the idea of building applications, user applications for people. And the ethos in that lab was this. Michelson said, I will let you work here, but we're going to treat you like an adult. You have to show up, you have to work hard, and you have to be excellent. So I had a high standard, and they gave me free lunch in the cafeteria. As a kid, that was awesome.
Yeah.
No pay, but I was given the research fellow title. So I proceeded to understand all these features.
Yeah.
So if we go to that inventorofemail.com site, all of these features is what I denoted. Inbox, outbox, there's lots of features. Now, in those mini computers in those days, you could send little text messages. We had a thing called messaging. Like from the Piscataway mainframe you could send messages. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about did that telegraph messages.
Yeah.
We're talking about I had to recreate that entire system, inbox, outbox, folders, in the electronic form. The doctors there, remember, they were on the hierarchy in the medical school. The doctors in those days were seen as the elite.
Yeah.
Secretaries were always these women. They had to dress a certain way, a lot of sexism. I never saw a gay secretary, okay?
Yeah.
Always a woman was a secretary. And she had to dress a certain way, look a certain way, there was that whole sexism. So the notion that a secretary, and this will come out later, could use a computer was first of all difficult, right? Because they were used to the typewriter. The doctors, one of the doctors, I remember he was the head of surgery, he said, why would I want to do this? Why do I want to do this? I just tell my secretary and she does, why do I want to be writing email? You see what I'm saying? He had full service, he had concierge. And so, anyway, the first process was I interviewed these secretaries and made the list. In parallel, I knew Fortran, and we built this on the database. So one of the things was, remember, you had very low memory, only 8K of memory, 8 kilobytes. I had to, so if you have a program which would take, let's say, 100 kilobytes, and you only have 8, what do you have to do? You have to do what's called segmentation of memory. I had to write memory loading and segmentation stuff.
Wow. Okay.
So I had to write a kernel program which would load, which would have all the menu, and as you wanted, for example, to read a mail, it would load the read mail program. So I had to take this huge program, which I eventually wrote 50,000 lines ago, and partition it into different blocks of memory that I would load in 8K of memory to give all these features.
So this is something like
I had to write the memory manager,
yeah.
Okay? This is understanding memory management. So I had to do the programming in Fortran. And by the way, Fortran was meant for scientific data processing, not like C, not like text-based languages. I was using a scientific data processing language to do text-based processing.
Yeah, but this is something like the top scientists and engineers are working with, right? And you as a 14-year-old boy, you have the opportunity to work with these softwares.
Amazing people, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so I was never treated as a 14-year-old kid.
Yeah.
I was treated as an equal.
Yeah.
And that's what's fascinating. I was treated more as an equal by Dr. Michelson and those people than I had been by that woman who's screaming at my father,
Yeah.
or in India. And in that environment is where innovation took place, right? So I had this amazing parents who were supportive. The fact my parents let me go to Newark, you know, this school teacher, Stella Alexiak, who had done this thing to rearrange, you know, fought for me,
Yeah.
and Dr. Michelson, right? That was a quote unquote ecosystem where email came out of. And this is hard for people to fathom. And they didn't have a lot of money, but it was in that ecosystem, a hardworking kid who had a mentor, a loving parent, and a good, dedicated teacher. That's where innovation comes from.
Yeah.
And in that environment, I wrote 50,000 lines of code. Man, I used to work until 2 in the morning. We didn't have laptops in those days. We had these big things with a big, like, carrying case. And we had 1,200 baud modems,
Yeah.
right? That I would carry home and program until 2. Remember, I was
You
still...
would carry this home as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I would work until 2 in the morning on my kitchen table, writing Fortran code, okay? And I remember, you know, we created... Remember, it had to be user-friendly. This wasn't just exchanging text messages like a bunch of nerds. I had to make it useful for these secretaries. Let me tell you how this is not an easy problem. I mean, when people talk to Steve Jobs, people really know him. I had a friend of mine who worked with him. He would belabor over making the UI easy. The user interface, because he wanted him... the secretaries weren't going to use the system unless it looked and smelt like their inbox, outbox folders.
Yeah.
It had to have every feature, Marcelo, because they were moving from a whole different universe. It's like going from Earth to Mars. You want to make Mars look as much as Earth.
Yeah.
So you're going from this physical desktop now to a digital desktop. So I had to create that whole desktop.
Yeah, that's something revolutionary.
It was revolutionary. When you printed it, I had to add print features. I created a whole... I mean, the stuff I did there is quite extraordinary. But one of the things we did was I made sure that an email was only saved once. Google and all these people are retarded in some ways. Excuse my language, but they're stupid. You're transporting an email. I never transported the email. When you wrote an email, remember I wrote this on the Hewlett-Packard system. Hewlett-Packard offered a database. The network protocols were there. We didn't use any of this other stuff. And I wrote my code over that, okay? Nothing invented by MIT or the military or any of these people, okay? Yeah. Everything, all that stuff was written above that. But we stored it, when you wrote an email, so if you were at a different, and I wrote you an email, it was written in a database and was denoted Marcelo was going to get it. When you came in and got your email, it was like a hyperlink. When you got the header, and I literally did a remote procedure call and I showed you that email. So the email was only stored once.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? This is quite revolutionary. Even now.
Yeah.
It's pretty stupid when we transport emails. So it's very secure. We had registered mail. Okay? CC. We called it BM, what you call email marketing. You could blast out to a lot of people. So it had every feature and more. I think registered mail, some of these guys only put in the 90s in some of these popular emails. I had all of that.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is that is email. Email is a system. And when you log into your email program, that's what you see.
That's what we're using. It's what
email's not a... Email
creators.
came out of the interoffice mail system to support collaboration in the business office environment. So between 1978, in fact, to look at 1993, you don't need the @ symbol. This is like nonsense, total BS. I used the dot. Okay? I remember many years later, Lotus Notes, when they used some other symbol. Okay? The point is, you had the user and you had which computer he belonged to. I had that same. I called it a zip node. I didn't call it a zip code. I called it a zip node. N-O-D-E. The nodes at computers, like domains, were known as nodes. And this is in my code if you go look at it.
Okay.
Now, the important thing, so I wrote 50,000 lines of code. I remember holding a seminar. Dr. Michelson talks about this. And he's written about this. And he goes, and then Shiva presented this whole system. And he goes, the speaker at the seminar was not an eminent scholar, but a 14-year-old high school student. And I used transparencies. We didn't have PowerPoint. We used to use transparencies over overhead projector. And there were hundreds of people who saw me present the system. I wrote the user's manual. I was also the QA person. I got people to test. We had bug development. This was used by hundreds of people.
At the age of 14?
14. Remember, I developed the system 14. Then I continued working on it.
Yeah.
I mean, we added features, etc.
So how long did it take you to make the?
Well, the first version, I mean, 14. I think about a year, and then I did more and more versions. I mean, programming is one of those things you get better and better. In fact, I was working on it even when I came to MIT, because people wanted more features. I added an administrative panel, all this stuff, man.
So people were using this system right away that you created then?
Yeah, first we had initial users, beta users, and in fact, Dr. Rich Corson, who was a medical student there, he was a medical student, but Dr. Michelson let him work. He wrote a program called Charger, CHRGR, again, 5 characters, which allowed Dr. Michelson to track which apps were being used and how to charge for it, because he wanted to make money from the other doctors. He had like his own little internal business running.
Yeah.
So when people used email, they'd have to pay pennies, for time sharing. So it was commercial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It was used by people, and so that's what happened. Now,
so you inventing it though, I want to go back to that moment. Like, how was?
Well, the most cool, the coolest
did you have
thing.
An epiphany, like, oh my god, I just created an email.
Well, the coolest thing, there's a couple of points, was the most important. I think the coolest thing was seeing me be able to send an email from one point and show up in the inbox, at another point by a different user, and then respond back to me. The full closed loop communication. So
there must have been a moment where that actually succeeded, and you're like, oh my god.
Well, the biggest thing was when I got the CC working, the carbon copy. It was one thing to do the boom, right?
Yeah.
But the carbon copy was even cooler. Because now what you were doing is you were sending not only a communication to you, but you were involving someone else that can also see it, and they could participate.
Yeah.
You see, that's why email is a social media. It's not just military communication, point to point. And there's something important to be made here. You see, email grew out of a civilian environment, trying to help people collaborate. Military communication, there's no collaboration. It's top down, general sense, order.
Yeah, and you're talking about like just messaging people.
Messaging. But I'm saying the military doesn't care about collaboration. They don't want collaboration. It's not like, let's hear everyone's ideas. What do you think about Bill? We're going to hire him, right? Or let's get people support in a grant. You got to understand, email is a system for collaboration. Yeah. Well, think about how much business gets done in email today. I send my I do contracts. I do $1 million closes. My sales guy sends an email to me and to the customer. There's a document. We collaborate. We go back and forth. We close a deal. That's why the CC, the BCC, attachments, simple in military communications is I want to send that guy a message, period.
Yeah.
Okay? And that guy's going to send, it's very point to point.
Yeah. And it's done for like war purposes.
It's done for war.
It's not done for the people, for innovation or
Right. And you don't, and the point is, I'm not saying I invented electronic messaging. Electronic messaging, to be clear, is the exchange of text through a electronic or an electrical device.
Yeah.
Morse code is electronic messaging. The radio type IBM had in the 1930s is electronic messaging. Sending message between two computers is electronic messaging. We're talking about the system.
The system that we use today.
That's called email. And the important thing is I called it email.
Yeah.
Now, that term was not an obvious term. Because the reason I called it email was the operating system of the Hewlett-Packard operating system only allowed 5 characters for the names. The Fortran language allowed 6 for variable names. But if I use 6, the operating system didn't know it. So variable names could be 6.
Yeah.
But the programming name could be 5. And I remember looking at it. I didn't even know how to pronounce it. I thought it should be Emal. It was a weird name.
Imagine if you came up with Emal and like we would just be using that nowadays. Emal.
Right. So the point is,
yeah.
If I had been given maybe 9 characters, I may have called it electromail.
Yeah.
It's not an obvious term. No one had ever used that term before. No one had put those 5 characters together. And it had to be in uppercase because of Fortran language, everything was in uppercase. Right?
Yeah.
So I called it email, wrote the code, and in 1980, one of my teachers in my high school was also into competition. This is a very wealthy high school. They wanted at least their kids. I was seeing, remember, there's 4,000 kids in my high school. It's about 1,000 kids in my graduating class. And me and my sister were the only 2 Indian kids. Okay? I was on our high school soccer team. I used to play halfback, won states, 13-0, undefeated. So I also played soccer during this whole period. Yeah. Very competitive again,
yeah.
Right? So in that time frame, in that environment, right? One of my high school teachers, Mr. Walker, who's still alive, chemistry teacher, amazing chemistry teacher. Talk about excellence. If the answer is 99.95 and you wrote 99.4, 10 points off. Okay? Yeah. This guy was not only teaching chemistry, AP chemistry, but he was also a contractor and a carpenter. He put 2 of his kids through, he told me this much later, through medical school. I mean, these were dedicated teachers. So Mr. Walker said, Shiva, you should apply for the Westinghouse Science Award. Westinghouse Science Award was known as the Baby Nobles in those days. I think later became the Intel Awards, and I think someone else took over it now. We'd had one guy in my high school who won one of the Westinghouse Science Awards. He ended up winning the Nobel Prize in chemistry. Okay.
It was a pretty big award.
It's a pretty big award. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting people who win those awards and what they do later in life. So I was encouraged to submit my invention for the Westinghouse Science Award. So that's what I did. In 1980, you had to submit it. And in that award, in fact, there was a Thomas Alva Edison Award and there was a Westinghouse Science Award. I won the Thomas Alva Edison Award, and I used the same essay. And in that essay, to your earlier question, I wrote, one day I believe email will be as important as a light bulb. It will present a way to eliminate paper. It was quite a prescient thing for, I think I may have been 15 or 16 to write.
You were thinking way ahead.
I was thinking way ahead. Yeah. And so I was writing that. So clearly, and again, this is not because you're some super genius. It's because when you're among people and you're working, innovation is really solving a problem. I wanted to get these secretaries from the typewriter to the keyboard. Yeah. And I could see how much freaking work they had to do to write a letter. I could see, you see what I'm saying? So my observation was natural. Yeah. And as we'll see later, when we'll talk more, is that when the so-called controversy takes place, the other nerds thought this was impossible for women to move from there to there. And it's documented. Yeah. But I didn't think it was impossible. Because as a 14-year-old kid, I was among these were, I used to go eat lunch with the secretaries. Yeah. My friends were the janitors.
And that was your sole motivation at that time, is making their life more simple, right?
Well, it was that, and there's something beyond that about creating something.
Yeah, creating something.
I can't explain to you the thrill of you creating a tool and other people using it. Yeah. It's the most extraordinary feeling you can imagine. Like, you make something and it makes someone's life easier, and they're using your thing to affect their lives.
Yeah, that's the essence of humans, is creation almost, right?
I mean, think about if you created a microphone, and now every person in the world is using a microphone, or that you've
the ripple effect is
you've changed, and that's why when Karl Marx said it is the tools that change the mode of production. It's a pretty profound statement. Marx sort of understood tools, which comes through innovation. So tools are almost something that can completely cause an inflection point in human history. You could be living like a bunch of animals, and then someone discovers fire. Yeah. Now you can cook. Now you're living, you know what I'm saying? So tools can completely transform the trajectory of any system from one state to another.
It can elevate our consciousness, it seems like.
Or de-elevate, or do something. Yeah. It can take it in all different, I'm saying it can take it from one point to another, okay? Somewhere. So to me, that was what was extraordinary. To be seeing these people using your system, communicating, giving you feedback, you enhancing it, adding new features, realizing this whole iterative process. Yeah. Right, so that's what was cool. So now in 1980, so I applied for the Westinghouse Science Award, and I think I called it a user-friendly network-wide email system. And they typically had finalists, and I was one of the honors. They select 300, thousands of people, tens of thousands. I was 300 of the honors. I didn't win the finalists because Dr. Michelson said these people probably didn't believe you did this. You know,
because these are all adults, right?
These are all adults.
Yeah.
Right. So I won that and came to MIT in '81. And the story of my coming to MIT is interesting because I was sort of done, Marcelo, and with being in front of a computer, frankly.
Really?
Meaning that I had done such hard work, man.
Yeah.
But I loved carpentry. I loved design. I used to do a lot of art. And I did not, frankly, my parents were dealing with my sister's stuff. My sister was in there, you know, in the Indian view, behaving extraordinarily bad, quote unquote bad, whatever you want. My older sister. And they asked her, do you want to go back to India and get married? So they had actually taken her to India to get back into medical school there. So all this chaos is going on the personal side. So I'm basically my own adult.
Yeah.
My parents had gone, and so I had only applied for one local state college, I think maybe two. I wanted to stay in New Jersey, I think Stevens Institute of Technology in Princeton. I have to look. And my mom was always helping people. She had seen these two women, two Indian women. I think they'd gotten kicked out by, one of them had gotten kicked out by her husband because she wanted a divorce. And there are two Indian women who came here were doctors who in order to practice in the United States, you had to pass an exam. So they were in like some Stop and Shop or something, looking at a board, trying to find a place. They needed a place desperately.
Yeah.
And I think my mom empathized with that woman and let her stay. We had a basement, you know, which was like a little apartment down there in our home, and said, you know, you two guys can stay here and you could study.
Did your mom know him?
No, I just met him at the shopping mall. She just felt bad for them.
That's funny.
Yeah, so these two women were living downstairs studying for this exam so they could practice medicine here. It's a very tough exam.
Yeah.
And one of them had a friend, his name is Gopal, who, and my parents are in India at the time, going back and forth, dealing with my sister's stuff.
Okay.
So he said, you should apply to the school called MIT. And I hadn't even heard of it. What was shocking was, in retrospect, why didn't any of my high school teachers tell me about this? Okay? Yeah. No one was giving me guidance, okay?
This is the most, like, the biggest tech school.
Exactly. Yeah. Very prestigious school. Yeah. Again, a lot of Jewish kids whose parents thought, again, they were the chosen people. Yeah. Literally, you would hear that. You know, I'd have to deal with this all day long. But no one told me about MIT. Wouldn't you think that someone should tell me? The kid who's by the way, I scored 800 on my SATs.
Won all these amazing awards.
Made these awards. I was #1 in all of the state math awards. You know, like every award in science and math I was acing. Yeah. Was also selected for American Legion Jersey Boys State, where they select an athlete scholar. Right, but no one told me about MIT. So anyway, this guy comes who is a friend of these women who, you know, staying. He said, you should go to, and he brings the brochure. And I remember to this date, it was a white big brochure with the picture of the MIT dome, and it said Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Inside I was saying, this sounds like a mental institute. Because it looked like an institute, big, you know, like too big. And I wasn't going to apply to this stuff. It seemed, I hate to say the word, I don't want to say demonic, but something institutional. Yeah. Right? Not anything with any personality.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it.
It seemed like some,
it, right? Like
yeah. So I wasn't going to apply. It's something that didn't strike me right in my gut. So 2 weeks later, he comes by and he says, you need to apply to this. So I take a pencil, Marcel, and I fill out the MIT application.
Just to get him off your back.
Yeah, and I just filled it out. And in the MIT, you had to draw a picture. They made you draw your favorite cartoon character. So I drew Beetle Bailey, who I could draw at the time. And I submitted it, and I get accepted. And then my high school physics teacher, who was, by the way, had a mark on her. She had been in the Holocaust, you know, whatever, or had been in a concentration camp. Yeah. And she would always talk about that, you know, what had happened to her. Then she tells me, oh, yeah, you should go to MIT. My son does his PhD there. Remember, in these high schools, they get credit points on if your students, right, the high school gets better points. Oh, this high school students get to Harvard, MIT. Yeah. You see? Yeah. So then they were encouraging to me to go to MIT. So I remember me and my mom went to MIT, and I remember walking up 77 Mass Ave, I was like built. I was into athletics. I was, you know what I mean. And I look at these kids, and they look crazy. You know, like they look. I mean, a freshman there looked like he was 90 years old.
Yeah, they were just overdoing it.
Well, yeah, they didn't look human. They looked like they were unhealthy.
Yeah.
Unhealthy was a word that came to me.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, something nerdly, right? Nerdly in the extent, not really smart, just like they were hovering over computers all day.
Yeah.
And I came back and I said, I'm not going to this place. This is insane, right? This is like a nonsensical place. Like it wasn't. I wasn't moved by.
Yeah.
That I got into MIT.
Yeah. Who would?
Then that high school teacher said, Shiva, you should go. Forget MIT. You will like Boston. It's the Athens of the world. There's music, there's art, there's people from all different cultures. And I like cities. You see, I grew up in Bombay, and I always liked city. I liked New York.
Yeah.
I didn't want to, I went to Princeton and it was too suburbia. And so that was the only reason I came.
Yeah.
Because I thought I'd get to see city action. So I came to MIT, and
how old were you at the time?
I think I was 16 or 17.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I just turned 17. And September 2nd or 3rd was orientation at MIT for the incoming freshman class of 85. It came in 81. I came to MIT. On the front page of MIT, not the student newspaper, the official MIT newspaper, they highlighted 3 students who were coming in that class of 1041. They said, we have some extraordinary students. One of the students did a solar panel. One of the students built an email system. And I remember looking at that at the University of Medicine. It's right there on the front page. And I was brought to be so humble, Marcelo, that I didn't tell anyone that was me. You know?
Yeah.
I just looked at it. But I was more interested in systems, like political systems. And one of my friends I hooked up with in freshman year, he was a junior, called Arnold Contreras. Arnold came from the inner cities of Texas, from nothing. You know, like my parents' background. Yeah. Somehow made it to MIT. In those days, MIT had minorities there who were real minorities. You know, Chicanos. Yeah. And real blacks, not bourgeois blacks. Yeah. And these people are from inner cities. And
so you connected with these people.
Yeah, Arnold and I connected, and he and I joined student government. And there was a thing called the finance board, who's the one run by students who gave money to all the student groups. And we were noticing they weren't giving any. They were only giving it to their group. So Arnold was a fighter, and I was very moved by Arnold's fighting spirit. So I ran for student body freshman class president, and I was selected student class president. So I got to go to the president's house that winter of '81. He had a meal, right? And he had invited the student leaders. So Dr. Paul Gray, interesting enough, he had grown up in New Jersey when it was a farm, and his mother, Martha, his mother still lived in New Jersey, interesting enough. Yeah. So Gray had known I invented this system, and he was on the science advisory board of, I believe, Reagan at the time. He was a chief science advisor, one of the science advisors of the President of the United States. And he said, it's unfortunate you cannot patent software. I didn't know any of this stuff. He said, it's too bad the Supreme Court doesn't recognize software patents, because they didn't know what software was. Yeah. They thought it was like paper, like you were writing stuff, right? Because you were writing this stuff on a computer, like music or a novel. Yeah. But he said you should copyright it. And I didn't know that in 1980, that at the time I invented email, there was no way to protect software. The only way you could protect software, you couldn't protect it in '78. However, in 1980, Congress had passed an act called the Computer Software Act of 1980, which took the Copyright Act of 1976, which allowed you to, as a writer, as a script writer, as a musician, if you wrote a piece of artistic work, you could put the C and you could submit to the Copyright Office, and your work could be protected. Yeah. Okay. They had amended that act to say you could use that act to submit your code, and they'd have to prove it, and you could then copyright your software inventions, because that was the only way you could protect software inventions. Yeah. So I didn't have lawyers. We didn't have the internet. You had to write away to the copyright, and they sent you the forms. There's no PDF you downloaded and printed. And it was $10. It was a lot of money for me. Yeah. I think I got I got one form, filled it out, with my stuff, right? And you had to submit all the code, Marcel. It wasn't like some of these idiots on the internet have said, oh, the copyright doesn't mean anything. You put a C with a circle. No. It was like this law was being developed.
Yeah.
Right? So you had to submit all your code, and I had to go back and forth. And on August 30th, 1982, at the time I was 18, I was issued the first U.S. copyright for email, recognizing me as the inventor of email. Yeah. Period. So I wrote the code with all those features, called it email, and I have the copyright.
Yeah. And at the time, people were regularly using email now, right? The system.
Well, yeah. So UMD&J, they're using now in 81. Remember, around when I submitted that code, it goes into the Copyright Office. Here's the thing. Here's a very, very important fact. We were open. We were transparent. When I was developing this in Dr. Michelson's lab, we didn't sign NDAs. There was no secrecy. Yeah. Oh, you can't see my code. I'm not going to show. That's what Apple and IBM and Microsoft do.
Yeah.
Like if I had grown up if that wasn't done in Newark and I was in Silicon Valley, I would have had lawyers. Bill Gates' father would have told me, don't show this to anyone.
Yeah.
We had Hewlett Packard going in and out.
Yeah, it was a completely different world.
We had IBM going in and out. So they were amazed. I mean, they probably said, wow, this is pretty cool. Yeah. So when I put this into 82, into the Copyright Office, everyone could have access to my code, right? So I can't say, well, that guy stole my code, right? But it wasn't like the extremes in technology. When Facebook writes something, you have to go through passcode, this code. You have to sign 20-page non-disclosure agreements before they let you see anything. We're inventing one of the most revolutionary applications on the planet, and everyone we were sharing. I was doing seminars. Anyone could come. It was an open public thing, right? So it's talk about open innovation. We weren't trying to make money off this. We were doing this for the sheer joy of creating. Yeah. And that's the environment Dr. Michelson created. It was an extraordinary gift that he gave to us and the other people.
Yeah. Innovation should not be about profit.
Well, it wasn't. We weren't even thinking about it. We were so excited that, wow, we could even do this. Yeah. Right? So that's an important thing to remember. So the code went in, and then Michelson had me as a consultant. I'd log in and sometimes I'd add new features. Up until probably 84, 85, I was doing that. Okay? And that's all documented. Yeah. So that's the invention of email.
Yeah.
Now, I went off in and out of MIT. Remember, while I was doing this journey, when I came to MIT, I had enough credits to graduate MIT in 2 years. AP credits, everything.
Because you already had credits from
I had so many AP credits, right? I had AP history credits, AP, which are all transferable. Yeah. Probably 2.5 years, to be 2.5 years. I was probably one of the top students that MIT had ever had. And I say that with all humility, because after a while you have to realize you have to tell the truth. It's being untruthful if you're too humble.
Yeah.
Right? Like I should have gotten a PR agent then, My parents should have found me lawyers,
Yeah.
But anyway, so here my journey was, I had sort of a huge something with MIT never gelled with me.
Okay.
And I'll give you what example that was. I would see a freshman come in who would speak normal. It's going to sound really weird. A kid was a normal kid. And I remember going to my first computer science class. There were these two nerds, Sussman and Abelson, teaching the class. I thought these guys looked disgusting.
Yeah.
They looked disgusting, but they were talking like this and, waving their, I hate to say it, but as though by doing all those weird motions and having twitches, you were an intellectual. And I was sitting in this class and I said, this is nonsense. I said, I've built all this. You're not even teaching anything interesting here. Like it was like a mechanic who'd built cars and who knew everything, going and learning like nonsense.
Yeah.
And so what I saw was these people had all these behavioral things, as though they had to speak a certain way, behave a certain way, dress sloppy, and then they were an intellectual. I saw kids who looked normal literally start having twitches, waving their hands weird ways.
Wow, so they just want to fit in, so they start doing
And I'm
things.
telling you,
and then
go watch those guys.
Yeah.
Go watch how these nerds behave. They act a certain way.
That's crazy. So
and
they
I
purposely
literally
do this
saw
just to try to
behavioral
fit
changes.
in.
Yeah, like that was your, and you had to argue incessantly about nonsensical things.
Yeah.
Get nerdly about minutia that was irrelevant.
Yeah, you see it all the time.
Right. This is this cult.
Yeah, it is a cult.
And I was so disgusted by it. And here, this is in 1981. So, and by the way, I was very outgoing, also extrovert. You know, I wasn't your typical, you know, and I was in a fraternity, very interesting fraternity. There was a guy in my fraternity, came from the South, Hansel Stedman, very interesting guy. Hansel was, came from the deep South, talk like this, but amazing athlete, Olympic level, I think, skier. Got his MD, ended up getting his MD, PhD at Harvard. But anyone else looking at him would think he was just some dumb hick. My point is that the MIT environment there was segregation there, that you behave like this and you're a nerd and you're like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, people still have this mentality.
Yeah, they have this mentality that you can't be a good-looking guy who's strong, who lifts weights, and you can also invent email, and you can, you know what I'm saying?
Even with girls, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's like even with girls, you have to look a certain way in order to be like a nerd, right? It's
right. So what I'm saying is so you could see this nonsensical. So I joined the Indian Club, and I became the president of the Indian Students Club called Sangam. Now in MIT, you had Indians like me who were here, Indian Americans, very few of us still. But most of the Indians were the Indians who'd gone from India. They were graduate students who'd come here. Yeah. And they were like robots. Go to MIT, get my degree, then get my PhD, then marry, get a job. Okay? So that's who the Indian Students Clubs were. Because I'm trying to figure out who I had a fraternity, I was in student body, these are my extracurriculars. So I was seen as an interesting guy, right? Because he's Indian. Oh, he's an Indian American. So I became president. I said, look, we should make this club really political. Let's start discussing stuff in India. Let's talk about corruption. So I get thrown out of the Indian Students Club. They didn't want to, because they were here not to rock the boat. Yeah. They just wanted to fit in, you see? So who became my friends? And these guys would always ask me my last name, Ayyadurai, or trying to figure out my caste. And they were all Brahmins, okay? So my friends became people like Arnold Contreras, poor Hispanics, inner city blacks, and poor whites. And in 82 or 83, you have to remember, this is when Reagan came in. There were some good programs that were set up, and we should talk about. Affirmative action was set up it was one of the gains of the civil rights movements, because the yardstick was set so back for particularly blacks and minorities in this country. Yeah. So part of the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s was poor people should have access to higher education. So in 1968, MIT had only two black,
really,
or 65, 68, two blacks.
Students.
One was a woman called Shirley Jackson. She was giving her PhD and she threw it down. She lectured all these professors how disgusting it was. Yeah. So they let in, I think, 10 black students. I forget the exact numbers, right?
One of them was your friend, right?
Well, no, this was a different guy.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But those 10 students in, I think, 1970 took over the MIT faculty club. And they demanded that MIT issue these changes. Yeah. These students realized, even though affirmative action was there, they were going to get fucked. Meaning, this was what was going to happen to them. They knew the people in power just did affirmative action as throwing a bone to say, oh, we're giving the darky something. But they knew they were going to fail, because when they got to the university, there was not going to be any programs for them to succeed. You see, to come to MIT and succeed, or Harvard, you better know calculus and physics, right? Yeah. Many of the students coming there came from, I was fortunate to go to Livingston, AP, but many of them were coming from inner city schools. Yeah. So they knew 1 or 2 years they're going to drop out. Right? So these students said, look, we're going to fail here. And the dropout rate was like 50, 60, 70% for minorities. They were coming in and they'd drop out after freshman year. There's no way they were competing. So these students demanded various programs, like we wanted an Office of Minority Education set up. We wanted tutorial programs here, because our high schools didn't give us this. Yeah. See, the civil rights movement and the Democrats and Republicans never addressed the fundamental issue of putting infrastructure in those inner cities. They just put a Band-Aid called affirmative action, and basically put it on taxpayers and said, well, let them handle it.
Yeah.
So these students were smart. They'd figured it out. And so MIT had set up all these programs. So by 1981, 82, minorities were coming in. There were these programs set up like MITES, which was for tutoring. So the minority students in the summer would come and they would basically get all this intense education so they could succeed, because there's stuff they didn't learn.
That was like purposely manufactured so they would fail, right? So they wouldn't
before,
succeed.
but those students in 70, 72, they were hard fight battles, not only at MIT, across university campuses. So, and these are inner city kids. So 1982, there was a woman called Dean Hope, a black woman, who was the head of the Office of Minority Education, and she was fired. This was after Reagan came in. Remember, Reagan was slashing and burning minority programs, cutting tuition. So a lot of my friends couldn't afford tuition.
Yeah.
And they had to leave back to get jobs. Or a friend of mine, Johnny Solis, was working. He came into his electrical engineering degree from El Paso, Texas. I mean, I went to his home. His parents would eat intestines. They were really, they reminded me of my grandparents back in India. They were totally poor people.
Yeah.
Right? So Solis had to work like 40 hours in the freaking cafeteria and go do an, there's no way he was going to succeed. And he ended up, in fact, failing and dropping out. Arnold, very smart kid. He took him 8 years to graduate. You see? So they had, Dean Hope gets fired because MIT's, now Reagan is in, so the idea is to say, let's get rid of these programs. They're expensive. So Dean Hope gets fired, me and Arnold. We were in student government, and we realized the student government stuff is nonsense. Okay?
Yeah.
It's just bullshit,
It
right?
really
They're not
is.
doing
It
anything.
still is.
Yeah.
It still is not.
It's just a bunch of careerist politicians trying to get brown nosing. And in fact,
Exactly.
when I was freshman president, in the second term I got put freshman. MIT has this ring. All these kids get the brass ring. I thought it was it's like seen as a prestige.
Yeah.
I never got one because I never liked this class of stuff.
They still do that, yeah.
They still do that. And there's a ring committee, which the freshman governance, and once you're on the ring committee, you get to select the ring company.
That's so stupid.
But check this out. Whoever's on the ring committee, the ring company they select, all the people on the ring committee get free rings.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I'm looking
I
at this, and this is total
benefit
corruption, because you're not going to select the ring that's the cheapest ring or the most economical ring, the best value bang
'cause
for the
you're
buck.
gonna get it for free.
You're going to select the most expensive one.
Yeah.
Right? So I said this is corruption, and I was trying to pass a bill against them, but it was like insider trading. That's when I realized this whole thing's a scam, and this is what they were training me to do, be part of a scam. So Dean Hope gets fired. So me and Arnold, literally overnight, we start a newspaper called The Student, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I find the fist, we call it The Student, and we write a scathing article against the MIT administration for the firing of Dean Hope. And we literally print it. We like steal MIT Xerox machines, like we just go in there and we print like thousands, and we just, it becomes a popular hit. 83, 84 is when the primaries are taking place. A guy called Jesse Jackson is running against Walter Mondale and Reagan. And we were excited with Jesse, oh wow, he's a new movement, rainbow movement, like an independent movement. On the floor of the Democratic Convention, the primaries, he gives all of his votes to Mondale, gives some sorry-ass speech, basically becomes an Uncle Tom.
Yeah, and so you're supporting Jesse at the time, right?
Yeah, I was supporting his defiance against the two. Something never seemed right with these two parties.
Yeah.
And then, but when he did that, I broke from both parties, and The Student became a radical newspaper. Like, we started meeting activists in Boston, and then I realized why it was good to come to Boston. I met like Marxist-Leninists and anarchists, and they started giving me stuff to read on Marx, on Lenin, Nietzsche, all this stuff. And my education just blossomed on revolutionary politics.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there was a guy at Harvard, Jaspal Singh. Jaspal supported our Senate campaign. He's like, and Jaspal used to come watch me play soccer. And he wanted to recruit me for some other radical movement he was in. But Jaspal gave me amazing books to read, and I started working with Chomsky and trying to understand why the caste system existed.
So I became Chomsky back then? Or?
Yeah. So I did a research project with Noam Chomsky.
With Noam Chomsky, really?
Yeah.
What was
So
the
MIT had this thing
project?
called the UROP program, University Research Opportunities Program. You got to talk to a professor and see if you could do an independent study research. So I convinced Chomsky that he should help me figure out why the caste system existed. So over a year, I studied with him. He gave me books to read.
for a year you were
yeah. So that's how I know Chomsky still. I mean, he and I still communicate through email, right? So Noam and I figured out that the caste system. We'll do a whole episode on this. I figured out where the caste system came from. We had started this newspaper, and we started attacking the Democrats and Republicans, and we realized that they were really the enemy. Right? Because, in fact, we realized when Reagan's tax cuts were going on, Tip O'Neill was supporting all of it, right? The Democrats were supporting everything he wanted.
Yeah.
And I remember one time we said, why doesn't Tip put his own tip on the tax block, you know? So we would write these hilarious articles, and me and Arnold would distribute. They became the most popular.
Yeah.
And
it almost sounds like blogs nowadays.
It was like the blog. It was like the blog. And the student newspaper geeks just, I mean, you could see the same thing. Careerist student politicians, careerist student newspaper guys.
Yeah.
In fact, that people would go from there to become like editors at the New York Times. Like Barry Sermon, who was the editor of the Tech, became an editor at the New York Times. It was like a stepping stone.
Okay.
It was all this careerist shit.
What did the school newspaper think about your paper?
They hated us.
Yeah,
they would attack us, right?
Yeah.
And we became, that one sheet became so much more powerful. So you had the establishment newspaper, the Tech, ours a revolutionary. And you know what the administration does? This is why I talk about the establishment, the revolutionaries, and how the establishment will create a wing of theirs that acts like it isn't there, but is theirs, like a Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
They funded these other liberals, Democrat liberals, just put it broad, to create a newspaper called The Thistle. So the administration gave the Tech funding, not us and them, because we were becoming so popular, Marcelo.
Yeah, they wanted
our
to
politics, we
compete
were
against
radicalizing people.
Yeah.
So for example, when the apartheid protest took place, so by the way, we ran protests all over Massachusetts. Henry Kissinger came to Boston. We had him kicked out. We issued 10,000 pieces of the leaflet
because of the Vietnam War, probably, right? That was
well,
right
he was
after.
Speaking at the Fletcher School. Along, we called him a warmonger.
Yeah.
We issued 10,000, and Kissinger issued a statement in the Boston Globe. He said, "Because of the abuse I received in a newspaper called The Student, I won't be attending." When Caspar Weinberger came, we had a huge protest. He was chased away with tomatoes and everything out of John F. Kennedy School of Government.
Well, because I could imagine all these people going to MIT that are like very famous scientists, engineers,
our newspaper, we went everywhere. We go into the inner city.
The establishment,
right? So we distributed our newspaper when the Lawrence riots took place. I wrote an article, supporting the workers there. I organized the MIT food service workers. So I'll give you an example. When we took an issue, we took it away from left and right.
Yep.
So in the apartheid issue, South Africa, this is in the 80s. We're talking about, people are being shot, literally, mowed down, students, Soweto rebellion and so on. When the apartheid protests were taking place in South Africa, the liberals, so you had the typical right wing at MIT who said, oh, well, we're helping those darkies there. We should send them the divestment movement, right? And the liberals were in this middle of the road. Well, we shall overcome. We should stop. This is not right. And there's like partial divestment. Yeah. So what did the position we took, the student, because we became a movement on campus, we said, you know what? Apartheid takes place right here. We don't need to, we said the problem with liberalism is you guys, we'll talk about the stuff in South Africa. Oh, those poor, but you won't even go to Dorchester or Roxbury here, or you won't even talk about the fact of the food service workers being paid less. So we built shanty towns right on we built these shanties, and we then said we need to end apartheid from Boston to Soweto. So we brought in the food service workers to support the apartheid movement. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
we linked. It was a much more sophisticated movement. And so one time we did a protest from BU up Comm Ave across the Mass Ave Bridge down to the steps of MIT. Well, we're marching, and the liberals have their thing: no to apartheid, stop apartheid. This very lame things. And you have to understand, in South Africa at the time, there's like major explosive, things are escalating, right? Major shootings, like students are, so we had a button which said death to apartheid. And we took up the slogan, apartheid in South Africa, burn it to the ground. And everyone starts chanting it because they were angry. Yeah. You see, and these liberals surround me with my megaphone, right? You can't say that. That's too violent.
Oh
and we're
my
like,
God.
shut the fuck up. You know, what are you talking about? So you could see liberalism wanting to run movements but contain it.
Yep.
They don't want it to be explosive. They don't want people to express their natural instincts, their hatred, their anger, right? They want to always contain. So they'll do protests to the extent they can contain it and shepherd it and be the wing of the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Right? So I saw that as an 18, 19-year-old kid, how the and many of these organizations were involved in those protests. They would be DSA people, Acorn people, you see?
Yeah.
Things that Obama belonged to, right?
Yeah.
Fake lefties.
Yep.
They always wanted to, as though the masses were stupid. Oh, you can't say that. You can't talk like that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Always containing people.
There was some form of political correctness still.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So I remember we marched across, and when we got to MIT, you know, I gave a talk, and I pulled out the South African flag, which I went and bought in Arlington, and I'm dousing with kerosene. We're burning it.
Yeah.
And there's a picture you'll find burning the South African flag.
Yeah,
and
I've
the
seen that.
black police officers didn't do anything. They let me do whatever the hell I wanted because there was so much anger.
Yeah.
And we built a movement on campus. And then we marched to Paul Gray's office, the same guy who told me that I should copyright email. At that time, he became my enemy.
Really? Why did it become your
Because
enemy?
Gray was supporting.
Oh, he was in support of what you were doing?
Yeah, because I think Dr. Gray had a lot of respect for me, but he was saying, I had all the facts, and I started calling him a liar, and he started shaking. Anyway, we raised hell on that campus.
Yeah.
And when I finished my undergraduate, in fact, 5-10 years ago, the provost at MIT wrote in the faculty newsletter, "Where have people like Shiva Ayyadurai gone?" He goes, "We used to have porcupines on this campus." Like, basically talking about how all these students are lulled into sort of sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking civil disobedience for civil disobedience sake. We're talking about real revolutionary politics.
Yep.
So, Marcel, what I'm trying to say is, you're talking to some guy who was really moved by his grandparents, you know, to work hard. But also, I saw in my friends who are from inner city East LA, my people,
Yeah.
who were also in India. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, you had a very profound belief, I guess, back then.
Still to this day, that's
Yeah.
what moves me. So people would say, when I was young in India growing up, 5 years old, my dad's friend came, and in India there was a revolutionary movement growing among the farmers. 87% of India's farmers. This was a 5-year-old kid, and this friend of mine, he goes, "Oh my God, these peasants are shooting their landowners or landlords." And I was just listening. I said, what do you mean? Why are they doing that? Well, these peasants have no food, they have no clothing, and they think it's okay to go kill the landlords. I go, well, what's wrong with that? Like, to me,
Yeah.
like, what the hell is going on? You have all of this, and they have nothing, and they
Yeah.
shouldn't fight back? And I remember the guy looking at me really angry. He goes, "Your son's a communist." And my dad saying, "Don't worry, my son will change." But I haven't changed, Marcelo. My anger, my hatred against injustice never waned.
Yeah.
It's so, because I think about my grandparents, I think about my grandfather, I think about truth, you know? I think about the life of Jesus Christ, you know? Because my grandmother, you know, loved the life of Christ, or the honorable fighters. I mean, they're deep within me, you know? They're like so deeply epigenetically programmed, probably from sleeping on my grandmother's lap and hearing those amazing stories.
Yeah.
So that was so I ended up graduating MIT like 5 years instead of 2 years. Because I was involved in the student, we were raising hell. It didn't matter to me and I figured out the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
I figured out what MIT was. I figured they just wanted to make me a machine, and these people are tools. When I say these students would change, you could see them being manufactured to be stupid nerds. It's an interesting, stupid nerds. That's what they were. So
they don't want you to speak out. They just want you to.
Well, look, segregation is not just black and white. Segregation is, okay, to look like a scientist, you must have a beard, a pocket protector, and a nerd, and you must dress all shabby,
Yep.
and you must talk like this. Then you're a nerd.
Or else
okay?
we're not going to accept you.
Right.
Yeah.
To be an athlete, you must look like this. To be a movie star or celebrity, you must behave like this. You see what I'm saying? They have created all these forms, and then they put you into those buckets.
Yep.
They don't want people breaking those boundaries. So I was an athlete. I was talking about this, and I could throw a freaking fastball at 80 miles an hour. You know, I haven't thrown one. You know, but I mean, that doesn't compute.
Even to this day, people think that's not possible. You
Exactly.
can't
That's
be
not
that
possible.
dynamic, yeah.
I mean, you can't be coordinated, you know? You can't bench press, weights and still be, you know what I'm saying? Like all these things don't compute for them.
Yeah.
Like the thought of being a human being is very one-dimensional.
Yeah. I think people learn this in school as well. That's how they're in public schooling.
And to be an intellectual, you must behave like this.
Yeah.
Right? Then you get your PhD. In my case, I went to MIT, did my bachelor's. Always, by the way, I always had a job, full-time jobs. I was making money on my own because I could program.
Oh, yeah.
I had about $100K in the bank by the time I was 21 years old. I bought my first home.
Wow, you had a super valuable skill that
I was always programming. I could charge good money, man.
Yeah.
I didn't want to pay rent, so I think by 86, I'd bought a home. One my parents I get in Belmont. Okay.
Wait, how old again? Say that again.
When I was about 19, I bought my first home.
19, you bought your first home.
Wait a minute, 17, 16, 17, 18, 19. I'm sorry. What is senior? Senior,
21. 21.
Yeah.
Wow.
But my point is that I was doing many things. I was doing research. I won the research awards at MIT. I was working with Chomsky. I was raising hell. I was doing all these things. So to me, it was doing all of these things were the same thing in many ways. And I needed about 5 hours sleep. I'd meditate. So I knew how to have high energy, and I would go into deep sleep. One time when I was in college in my fraternity, I bet people that I could stay away 15 days with only 30 minutes sleep, because I came to the conclusion that if you could go into a deep state of sleep, and believe it or not, for 9 days I did it, and then this fear came. I had a final exam, but I could have done it. It's fear.
I think that's what the military does, right? As well,
what I'm saying is I grew up with that training from my grandparents, what you call Siddhi training. Like what yogis or ninjas learn. I learned that kind of stuff as a young kid, okay?
That seems like a super valuable skill.
It is. Yeah. So I had these skills, and I was very motivated. I had a deep hatred for injustice.
Yeah.
So I was working after I finished MIT, while I was going to MIT, I was working at a company called GCI, which we created before PowerPoint. There was a company called Lotus 123, which created the first spreadsheet. We created the PowerPoint version to that. I was one of the senior engineers, and that got sold to Lotus. And then I came to work in Lotus, which used to be on First Street in Cambridge, and then while I'm working there, they paid for me to go back to MIT as long as I'd keep consulting for them. And I ended up going back to MIT to getting my master's in a new lab that had just been founded called the MIT Media Lab, which is bringing artists and technologists. I did the first visualization of waves in solid material that no one had ever seen, and I also ended up getting my master's in mechanical engineering. In the 1800s, a guy called Lord Rayleigh had predicted if you sent a sound wave through material, it would create these waves in certain patterns. No one had ever seen these. So I mathematically modeled it for my master's in mechanical engineering, and then I visualized. It was called scientific visualization, which you call big data today. Okay. I created some of the first visualization systems. When I finished that, I was very much into pattern analysis. Yeah. And I started doing my work I was in the middle of doing my PhD. I worked with MIT to create what was called a new interdepartment between the engineering school, the computer science school, etc. It was my own little, because my research was so new, my PhD was seeing if I could create a new technology that could analyze any pattern. Your face, your fingerprint, any kind of pattern.
Okay.
Voice, one technology to analyze your voice pattern or your fingerprint handwriting. While I was doing that, this is the mid-90s now, early 90s, I was also working at a company building a search engine for something else, for CD-ROM engines.
Okay.
So anyway, while in the middle of all this, I get invited to participate in a contest to analyze email. Let me tell you what happened. Remember, so 78 to 93, what's going on? Email is in the office environment. If you went to a group of people in 93 and you said, how many of you have an email account? 2 people would raise their hand at a group of 1,000, okay? Because email is used in the office environment.
Yeah.
People, after my creation, people have things like Lotus Notes and Eudora, but there's always local area networks.
Yeah.
You connect a bunch of computers together. Many people of your age may not know this. Under the age of 40, you had local area networks, and you connected and you had an email program. You don't need the internet. That was the network.
Okay.
Okay, so up until 92, 93, email use was in the business office environment. However, in 93, something important happened. The World Wide Web came, WWW, which put a GUI interface on the internet, which was basically around since the 60s. And once that came, people started taking those email programs and rewriting them for the web-based interface, like Hotmail.
Okay.
And that's when email volume exploded. So email went from being a business application to a consumer application.
After the internet was invented, yeah.
Right? So a lot of people don't know this, because that's when email became available to Joe, because email was there, but Hotmail and these companies essentially put a web-based interface. And so what happened then was, these companies started growing, and more people, everyday citizens, started using email as a consumer application. And as a consumer application, organizations started receiving more inbound email. So the White House, for example, when Bill Clinton was there, starts getting 5,000 emails a day, and it keeps doubling. So there was a contest. The executive office of the executive office of the president, in cooperation with the National Institute of Standards, which was doing the text retrieval conference, ran to see, are there technologies which could automatically read an email and sort it into different buckets. Let me explain why this is important. Prior to email, the White House was getting basically print mail. So if you wrote to the president, you said, please tell me your position on education. Please tell me your position on drug enforcement. That would come in, and believe it or not, the White House had form letters. They had 147 different buckets of different form letters. So when a letter came in, they would choose the closest form letter, and they would write you back a letter with that form letter. So this is a way that the White House handled communication. But when email came, the way that they were doing it was they would treat email like a print mail letter. So they would print out the email, find the same bucket, and they would only send you back a print mail if you had listed your address in that email, which means your home address. So an email got responded to by print mail. So obviously this wasn't going to work, and they were getting to hire more and more interns to help Clinton. Probably shouldn't use the word Clinton and interns together, but the point is that email volume was growing, so the White House decided, are there AI type technologies that could read the email, bucket it into one of those 147 categories to automatically do that? So the long story short was, there were 6 companies invited to participate. I was invited because people had heard about my PhD work, so I decided to participate in this White House contest to automatically analyze and categorize President Clinton's email. The net of it was, I won that contest. I won the White House contest. Yeah. And that, when I won that contest, I had met an attorney, and he said, Shiva, you could always do your PhD. And remember, the internet is taking off now, meaning the World Wide Web, 1993. So I left MIT, which is unheard of also, to get into the PhD program, to pass your qualifiers. My parents were upset. Everyone was upset. What the hell? You're leaving your PhD? Because this is like... Really? Yeah. Yeah, how many people get to go to MIT? How many people get a master's? How many people get a PhD from the engineering school? So I leave, and I have no money. And the interesting one of the motivations I left was I was no money in the sense that I was doing consulting jobs, right? And I had a home. And something interesting happened. I love beautiful cars. I was driving down Freshpond Park when I saw this Corvette, which I still have, in 1994, and I bought it. Okay. $80,000. Okay, and I have a $2,000 a month payment on it. So I'm like, shoot, I need to make money. So I leave, and it was a motivation for me to start EchoMail. Okay. In fact, I started 2 companies. I started EchoMail, and remember, I was also doing a lot of arts. A lot of my friends were musicians and artists. I had a huge community of friends who were musicians, artists, and I also started a company called Arts Online. Arts Online was a company, we were thinking, wow, all my friends who are artists get screwed. Visual artists, they have to need all these stupid agents. Suppose we could create a portal where you could put artists up. We could directly help them go to the internet. So we bootstrapped this. I went to the mayor of Cambridge, And I said, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an MIT guy. I want to start this company to help artists. So he said, go talk to this guy who heads up the Multicultural Arts Center in East Cambridge. So I go to him, and they have a beautiful building. Convince him to give me space. And I said, I'll give you an internet connection. I didn't even have one. So he gives me a little 10 by 10 foot room. And in return, I say, I'll build your website for you. I go to MCI, and by this time I was doing seminars all over the country on educating artists that they should go on the internet. This is so new to people.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Arts in the Internet.
Really?
Went to MCI, which was a competitor to AT&T in those days, and I gave them advertising on the back of my book. And I said, give me an internet T1 line, which was unheard of. They gave me a T1 line to that building. And I went to digital, and I said, look, I'll put a banner ad, which was unheard of also at the time. We created the site portal called Arts Online. Digital gave me the computer for free, which was an alpha processing machine, which was like a supercomputer. I got a free line from MCI. The building guys gave me a free building. And we started doing Arts Online. We started putting arts companies all over the country. And we had our first thing where an artist in Scotland, we built this page, and he got his first order. This is 1993, 1994. We got $99 for a website. So we weren't making any money, but this was almost like a social service we were doing. It's like a revolutionary thing.
Yeah.
The internet could, and I wrote a book called Arts and the Revolution, Arts and the Internet, The Guide to the Revolution. It's very cool things in that book. People go read it. At that same time, EchoMail, the technology I had done for helping the White House, I'm trying to sell it to somebody. I luckily meet this guy who is hosting websites at a local provider here, and he had just won the contract to host all of AT&T's websites, $10 million contract.
Wow.
He said, Shiva, I think your technology could be used by AT&T. They have 40 websites. They're going to be receiving inbound mail. Long story is that I end up going back and forth to AT&T on the Fuwang Chinese bus. 15, because it's a long ride, right?
Yeah.
And I eventually get a contract from AT&T where they decided to buy the technology I'd won the contest for the White House for analyzing and using email, $40,000 contract. The 2 days before, for Arts Online, we'd burned through all our money. I had people working for me. I had gone to Foxwoods, taking my credit card, and I was up to like $20,000 on playing blackjack, because I had a whole system of winning. And my chief financial officer had screwed up the card count, and we lost everything.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You were doing card counting.
Yeah.
Back then.
So,
That's funny.
but he did it wrong on it. Anyway, so we come home back, like 2 days. Like, if you've ever been to these casinos, you don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
So anyway, the interesting thing was 2 days later, when I came back to our office, there was this check for $40,000 from AT&T. All that stuff that we'd gone back and forth to AT&T finally realized that they were going to need a technology, because they were going to be getting lots of inbound email, and they couldn't manually do it, that they needed computer-assisted technology to read the email, route it, etc. The interesting thing was, we had that building in the Arts Online building, we had a server, but AT&T did not want to host our software. The IT guys weren't ready for this new kind of technology. So what did we do? You call cloud computing, we call it ASP. In those days, we call it Application Service Provider. So we literally had this rinky-dink server, and a multi-billion-dollar company would route all their consumer emails to us. People had questions.
Yeah.
Our technology, read the email, extract out the attitude, the issue. I had some very powerful technologies we built for email management. In fact, we got 3 patents. And that technology would analyze email, sort it, and in fact figure out a response. So by the time a call center person logged in, from there they would log in from all over the world to that little server.
Was there any other companies doing this?
No one. This was totally new.
Okay.
Right? Called EchoMail. And I would get paid $1.83 for every email we automatically analyzed. 30 cents for every email that went through. So our company took off. Okay?
That's insane.
AT&T was my first customer. Then we got Nike, then Citigroup, and all of this. I did 40 million in sales myself. We would take on companies like, later on, IBM, etc.
And this is mostly you managing everything, right? Because the AI is doing every.
Yeah. And so basically, our stuff would do the. But remember, we started with this little. What you call cloud computing. We built that was for AT&T. We were the cloud for them.
Yeah.
And they would log in. So that company grew. So now I was only going to do this for 2 years to leave MIT. This ended up becoming a 10-year project, Marcelo. From 1993 to 2003, EchoMel grew. I sold a big piece of it. That's how I made a lot of money. That's how I bought my building, etc. 2003, I'm coming back to MIT. I'm just walking in to see what's going on. I see an advisor of mine. He says, Shiva, you left your PhD. You should come back and finish it. There's this really cool field called systems biology. It'll let you do what you really wanted to do in medicine. Because remember, I went to work in that medical school, like I said, to do really medical research. Dr. Michelson had me do email.
Yeah.
I came to MIT to do medical research, went in and out, and got back involved in email with EchoMel, okay, for 10 years. And so Professor Dewey said, come back. There's a field called systems biology where it wants to integrate computing and biology to mathematically model the whole human body or the human cell so you can find medicines faster and cheaper. So that's so 2003 to 7, we'll do a whole podcast on this. I created a new technology called Cytosolve. Went back to India, took a break to do research in now I had my PhD, I got all my engineering degrees. So I said, let me go now so no one could attack my scientific credibility. Let me go back and understand how my grandmother with all those tattoos was healing people. Because remember, one thing I didn't share, my grandmother was a healer.
Yeah.
When she was in that village, she could observe your face, predict what was going on in your body, figure out the right combinations of medicines that worked for you. This is one of my interests that grew in medicine. This is why I, in fact, wanted to work at that medical school. Because I was deeply moved how my grandmother with no degrees could heal people.
Yeah. So you're always into Eastern medicine.
Always into Eastern medicine or medicine.
Yeah.
And healing. I always wanted to be a doctor, but was so disgusted by the way medicine treated the body like parts.
Yeah.
And so that was my motivation. I thought I was going to be able to do programming and computing. In fact, I did when I first joined that medical school. I looked at how babies were dying in their sleep and used computing for that. I did do a project alongside that email project.
Okay.
But the Cytosolve came out. I went back to India and actually made a major breakthrough. I was able to integrate Eastern and Western medicine. Wrote a paper where I sort of unraveled what is Eastern medicine and the fact that it's actually related to engineering systems theory. Came back. And by the way, while I was in India, we should do another podcast. I got recruited by the Indian government to run one of the largest innovation centers. I exposed corruption there and I had to come back to America in 2010.
Yeah.
But I saw front face how innovation in an amazing country like India, where you have a lot of smart people, was being sustained by a feudal environment where people, because of that hierarchy.
Yeah.
So I came back to the United States after 2 years on my Fulbright in 2010 and was teaching a class at MIT in integrating Eastern and Western medicine, a lecture series, and then I started developing a class called systems visualization. This allowed me to combine my engineering systems theory, my love of art, and to really help students visualize very complex systems, healthcare systems, analyze systems. It's almost a new form of journalism I created. The most popular MIT class.
This almost originates from you as a little kid meditating, right? And visualizing what you want.
Exactly. This was a way to visualize very complex things.
Yeah.
And what's going on then is this is 2011. My mom tells me that she's got a horrible disease called pulmonary fibrosis. And you basically have like 3 months to live. It's a disease that comes like that. And it turns out the reason she got that was when we first came in Patterson, she worked at a mill which had those asbestos fibers.
Oh, no, really?
Right, yeah. So it takes time, you know?
Yeah.
And 3 months before she passed away, in a suitcase, this is in November or December, November, early, late October, she gives me a suitcase filled with all of those materials, Marcelo, of everything I had created for the invention of email. The code, the tape, the copyright, everything, in a beautiful Samsonite tooth.
She kept that
She kept that beautifully organized. My mom was very meticulous. You know, you find that people who have little are very well organized because they value everything. It was beautiful. My mom was a super organizer. And I look at this and I was very moved because I just come from India where I had to leave because I exposed corruption there, where there's all this hierarchy. And I was realizing, wow, in Newark, New Jersey, there was no hierarchy. Dr. Michelson treated a 14-year-old kid as an equal. And that's where innovation takes place. It takes place in that sense of where you have love, understanding, etc. With very little. Newark, New Jersey is where email was invented. And so I'm looking at this. A friend of mine who's a professor of media at Emerson, he goes, Shiva, you invented email. Why didn't you tell anyone? He has his friend Doug Ameth, who's a senior technology editor at Time Magazine, who actually wants to review all this material. By the way, the only journalist who went through everything. And he writes an article in Time Magazine called The Man Who Invented Email on November 11th, 2011. Then I was going to give all this material to my alma mater, MIT Museum. The curator of the MIT Museum, her name will come to me, she says, Shiva, this doesn't belong here. This belongs in the Smithsonian. We would be stealing it from you. So she fires off emails, and I get emails from the Computer History Museum in the West Coast and the Smithsonian. So and they're sort of vying for my material because this is considered like historical material.
Yeah.
Finally, I decided to put it in the Smithsonian. And on February 16th, 2012, next day after Valentine's Day, my mom had just passed on January 7th, 2012. And I had to go to India. In India, you have to shave your head. When someone passes, it's like an offering you do. So I had like a bald head.
For a funeral or just?
Yeah. When if you're the first son and your mom and your dad pass.
Oh, okay.
So I had just come from that mourning ceremony because I had to, for 16 days, say the soul takes to pass from January 7th to the 23rd. So February 16th, I go to the Smithsonian. They have a ceremony. I sign all these documents. It's sort of a nice ceremony. That evening, a Washington Post reporter, a young African-American reporter, journalist, she does this video series on me, on the invention of email, and everything's great. She writes a great article, Shiva Ayyadurai honored as the inventor of email. I think it was on the front page of the Washington Post. And that's when the proverbial shit hits the fan. The old guard, during those 35 years, this young, humble Indian kid, didn't have parents who were lawyers or publicists, didn't promote himself, had rewritten the narrative that a guy who has a pocket protector, has a beard and glasses, who works for a company called Raytheon, formerly known as BB&N, who did 15 minutes of code writing, adding text file to the bottom of a remote file, had conflated that to be email, Marcelo.
Yeah.
And all the computer historians, a bunch of dopes, had supported him.
Yeah.
And it held on to the story that email must have been created by the ARPANET. These total PR campaign they had done and bamboozled the American public.
Yeah.
But more importantly was the fact that this had gone into the Smithsonian. You see, it was one thing if it would just stayed somewhere else. But when it went into the Smithsonian, it was like a new skull was found in Africa.
Yeah.
And it had to be destroyed. Because all of these historians, remember, academics had built their pillar of history based on that. So once that went in, you have a guy, a historian, call me a fraud. He writes on their blog pages, which goes out to all the nerds, computer science nerds.
Yeah.
And he belongs to an organization called SIG-CIS, one Society of Computer Scientists, computer historians. And thousands, not hundreds, thousands of calls come into MIT.
Your office or just
MIT, the office of the president,
office of the
calling
president.
that I should be fired.
Yeah, just
now.
Because...
Remember, I was teaching it. I wasn't even making a penny at MIT. I was teaching this amazing course. My students loved me.
Just because you're teaching at MIT, they want you fired, and that you're.
Well, how dare this guy say he invented email?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with MIT, but just because you're part of like this institution and you claim this, they want you fired.
Right. This guy's crazy. Blah blah blah. So you have now. Remember, I have. In an elective class at MIT, you're lucky if you get 5 or 10. I was teaching this class where I had 60, 100 people showing up. And other professors are jealous of me. And I'm not even getting paid.
Yeah.
I did it for the love. And it's an amazing course. We had students from all over the institute taking my course. They would do amazing projects. So the head of my department, and I'm walking to MIT feeling like a freaking low-caste untouchable again, like I did something wrong.
This is something that changed overnight.
Overnight. Overnight, man.
That's insane, yeah.
And it's insane. Here, prior to that, I had been on the front page of MIT 3 or 4 times. One, when I first came in 1981. One, when I won my Fulbright, front page of MIT. I was on the front page of Technology Review, which is the most eminent magazine when I created Echo Mail. Centerfold, full page article about this guy who created Echo Mail. Look at these companies helping Nike and AT&T. But when I said email was created, not before I came to MIT, I'm no longer, I'm like a pariah, man, vilified. And I had been given my 2-year lecture in February. The head of the, I had two lectureships in the biological engineering department for teaching that East-West lecture series, and in the media lab for teaching the systems visualization. And they do not renew my systems visualization course. And the BE department says, oh, even he gave me a 2-year renewal. He said, oh, we made a mistake. We love your work, Dr. Ayyadurai, but we can't renew it because we can't do this anymore. It doesn't give this reason.
Yep.
Now, this is Doug Laufenberger, who was the head of the BE department, who 3 years ago was being hit by a black professor because he didn't get tenure. And all the black students at MIT were coming to me to saying, Shiva, we need you to do activist work against Doug.
Yeah.
And I looked at it, and the guy, frankly, wasn't qualified. So I stood up for Doug Laufenberger on principle. And Doug Laufenberger couldn't stand up for me on principle.
Yeah.
Okay? So here, Marcelo, I am here, basically no one is standing up for me.
And you're expecting people to...
Yeah, because
stand
here
up
is
for
a
you,
guy
right?
who'd
It's
fought
like-
for other students at MIT, who'd fought for faculty at MIT, who'd fought for the food service workers, and here, no one was standing. In fact, no Indians came up for me. One blog article said this curry-stained Indian should be beaten and hanged. Gawker Media puts out an article calling me an asshole and a dick and a fraud.
For nothing, right? For you just making this claim,
I didn't even make a claim. I just went into the Smithsonian.
You went to the Smithsonian, yeah.
Right. It should have been a day to honor the American dream, celebrate it. So Gawker Media Gawker Gizmodo reaches all the technical people in the world.
Yeah.
And so they put that out. Thousands of calls are coming into MIT, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? I said, if I wanted fame and fortune, I would have gotten it other ways, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that situation, my mom's death. I'm looking at the fact that I just came back from India where I saw corruption, how innovation is stifled. And I had a student in my systems visualization class, Devin Sparks, amazing kid, one of the most sensitive students, very smart kid, who saw what was happening to me. And he too had gone through his journey where he got pissed off with MIT. It's a whole nother podcast we could do on this, his journey. But Devin starts helping me because when you're attacked like this, I've talked to women who are rape victims, they think they did something wrong.
Yeah.
I said, shit, maybe I didn't invent email. Maybe I'm a freaking liar. Maybe I am a fraud. What am I,
Yeah, because you were standing up for yourself, right?
Yeah, but it took me a while to do that journey,
Yeah.
you see?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. I was standing up for others. I was fighting. I was burning flags. But here, it's an interesting journey where you have to value yourself, or for that matter, that 14-year-old kid.
Yeah.
To stand up for that kid, because no one else was going to stand up for him. And in fact, friends of mine are, what do you mean, Shiva, you invented email? What are you talking about? That was done by the military.
Yeah.
And asserting that truth was a whole different journey, Marcelo.
Yeah. It's almost like they want to trick themselves because they know
because they've been brainwashed.
Happened. Yeah.
So what did we do? I said, let me put my hat on as an activist, but for that 14-year-old boy. And so let's do the hard work, because truth is not easy. Truth is something you have to fight for. So Devin, literally 3 months he spent in the MIT libraries. We went and looked at every technical paper written before 1978. Okay?
You and Devin.
Me and Devin. We went through microfiche, papers. Like, we're thinking, shit, did someone else invent email? And lo and behold, that's why I believe there's a God. This guy, David Crocker, I call him Crocker shit, who claims he's a, internet messaging guy. Like, his people he worked at BB&N, Ray Tomlinson, him, had invented email. He forgot he wrote a paper to the RAND report. The RAND Corporation is one of the most eminent military consulting organizations. In 1977, 6 months before I started inventing email, he wrote amazing report talking about the state of electronic messaging. Like, what were the developments? What kind of software? And in that report, he's summarizing, he's saying, you know, at this point, no effort is being made to emulate, which means to create, the electronic version of the interoffice mail system.
Yeah.
It is impossible. He uses the word, it is almost impossible to hand all user needs. What did he mean by that? You have to decipher this. What this guy was really saying was, I'm smart, I can see the computer, but these secretaries, because what was he referring to as the interoffice mail system? Well, who uses that? Not nerds. It's secretaries. To create a system that would meet users of differing needs. People who could program and people who didn't know how to use a computer. They thought it was impossible.
Yeah.
But that's what I had created. So we put that out. So me and Devin created the website called inventorofemail.com. I registered it. In fact, I registered history of email, right? And then they attacked me. Look at this guy, he's a self-promoter. He created the site Inventor of Email. Well, they had the right to attack me in all different media.
Yeah.
So
for
we created Inventor of Email, and we literally post all the facts. I said, look, here, I screenshot all my documents. We put it up. Here's the code. Look, here's the code for inbox. Here's a code for outbox. Here's a code for registered mail. It's all up there.
Yep.
And we put up that site. And at that time, I went back to Noam Chomsky. And I said, Noam, do you know what's going on? And he didn't know. And I said, Noam, you need to say something. And he said, wow, you know, he goes, this story sounds very similar to the guy who created the wind wiper. And he tells me the story that there was a guy called David Noble who was a professor at MIT. David Noble was a professor of history of science. He was about to get tenure. Tenure is a huge thing. It's like you become a god, right? You don't ever have to, you get a salary for life.
Yeah, especially at MIT.
Yeah. So David Noble he was a professor of history of science. 2 weeks before his tenure review was up, he wrote an essay. This guy was a great man, I think. I think he was a great fighter. Far more than, frankly, Chomsky, you know?
Yeah.
David Noble wrote an essay saying that control systems theory, which MIT prides itself on, like they're the ones who created, like, you know, the automatic wind wiper, you know how it works? It senses water and it automatically moves.
Okay.
It's called control systems. You have a sensor, like the thermostat,
Yeah.
you know, right? So turns out that MIT didn't create that. That whole science, it was done by a Michigan mechanic in his basement. MIT professors went there and took that whole theory. So he basically, he was saying how innovation occurs in other places. He wrote that paper, he's denied tenure by MIT. He sues MIT. And Chomsky was one of the people who was deposed. Anyway, Noam said, this sounds a lot like that. So Noam writes a statement for me, okay, which we put up on the site. Noam Chomsky, then we do a press release. Noam approved it. Well, that we put out, because this is like a freaking firefights going on. I'm being called all these names.
I mean, because Noam's a pretty, I guess, famous person. He's someone that
12 midnight, I'm with my friend Lorraine Minetti, by the way, who was my next door neighbor, my high school sweetheart, or my child sweetheart. She had heard Lorraine, I had just gotten out. Lorraine, who cannot fly in an airplane, comes up here, stays with me for, I would get up at 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning. Devin would show up and we would write and do the research. She would just make me food, make sure I was healing, you know? It was like a firefight, man.
You just had 3 months of you nonstop doing research? Is that how long?
Yeah, that website, I mean, it's like a PhD thesis.
Yeah.
3 to 6 months, you know, we're just writing, putting out firefights. So Chomsky gives another press statement, which we put out. Chomsky gets hammered by the MIT administration.
Really?
Chomsky calls me up, quote unquote, he goes, Shiva, why did you put that out? I said, no, you approved it. He goes, well, I'm getting attacked by my home institution. I go, Noam, what do you mean your home institution? Like the military-industrial complex is your home institution?
The thing he talks against.
And that's when I saw what Chomsky's about. He has his, look, Noam, but Noam even said that David Noble was more radical than he was.
Okay.
So Noam he had made his choices, you could see, okay? So my point is that we were essentially on our own. And Devin was so upset. He said, Shiva, how do you put up with this? And he was one of the most sensitive people. You know, he had to take like a break because he couldn't believe the level of anger. And what were people angry at? That's what the issue is.
Really takes a toll on you.
Well, but what were they angry at?
Yeah.
They were angry at a couple of things, Marcelo. They were not just angry at the invention of email. They were angry at various things. A, that it didn't come out of the military-industrial complex. B, it came out of Newark, New Jersey. B, it came from a 14-year-old kid. C, that this Indian guy was not willing to walk away. I wasn't willing to be a good Indian.
Yep.
Because, getting back to the segregation, the Indian is viewed as you shake your head like this, and you speak like this, like Deepak Chopra, and then you're acceptable. You can speak about meditation, but you sure can't be a fighter who says F you to them and challenges them. In the middle of this, it gets even more interesting. In 2014, I mean, this fight's going on since started in 2012, 13. I mean, this is consuming my life.
Yeah.
2014, Walter Isaacson, who wrote Steve Jobs' biography, Aspen Institute. If you want to talk liberal, put liberal to the power of infinity. That's Walter Isaacson. I mean, he writes a book called Innovators of the Digital Revolution. A big book.
Yeah.
You know, Innovators of the Digital Revolution. Now, don't you think he would discuss email? Isn't email part of the digital revolution? Email's left out of it.
Really? He doesn't.
The history of email's left out of it. He talks about Bill Gates. He talks about Sergey Brin. And look at the pictures, all white people. In fact, a white woman. But no mention, there's no person of color. There's no person yellow or black. It's all white people.
That look like nerds.
Well, that look like
Yeah.
the people, the anointed ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And more importantly, they're all within the triangle of the military, industrial, academic complex.
Yep.
So if you look at a picture of me, which we have about me, I'm a pretty dark-looking young kid. You see, when I was at MIT, I was part of that complex. That's why I got, I fit the narrative, put him on the front page, Echo Mail, boom. But when I said email was created before, I have basically rebelled against him. I needed to be spit out.
Yeah.
And Walter Isaacson in that book says all great innovations come from that golden triangle. That's what they call it.
That's what he says.
Well, he's
Yeah.
the military industrial, that triangle.
Yep.
So as we're doing, David Crocker, that crock of shit guy, he writes an editorial in the Washington Post. He says, see, no one person could invent email. Like now trying to take this high road.
Yeah.
It can only occur through collaboration.
Yep. Like a group effort that
Yeah,
all of us.
exactly. And the collaboration he's talking about is a military-industrial academic complex. Not the collaboration I'm talking about is a loving family, a mentor, and a dedicated school teacher. And by the way, that same story is Philo Farnsworth, the boy who invented TV. But he was white, you see, so now there's a statue of him and he gets... But it's hard for them to swallow because this is not only a race issue, but also an issue, this was outside of the military industrial. Philo only had to deal with one, which took him 60 years to get recognition. Now there's a statue of him in Congress. Same thing. He had a mentor, he had a school teacher, and he had loving parents. In Franklin, Idaho, 600-person town, he saw how the cows did this motion, and then he did the raster tubes, he invented TV. RCA came and stole it. He had patents. You'd say you could patent hardware, right? I had my copyright. They stole it. They produced TVs and they ran him into the ground until the 19th year when he won. Patent life is 20 years and he won. Yeah. He died as an alcoholic. My point is, he only had to deal with the military-industrial academic complex. I had to deal with that and the race issue and the fact it occurred in Newark. So the facts are, email, the system as we know it today, was done by a 14-year-old boy, Shiva Ayyadurai, in Newark, New Jersey, in a very different ecosystem. And the real lesson here, it goes at the heart of what it means to be a human being. You see, at the essence of being a human being is it's about creating. If you believe in the concept of the divine, and if you believe in the founders of this country, and you believe in any spiritual teaching, it says a soul within each one of us, it's a divine spark of God. And that soul's ultimate expression of its divinity is through creativity. Yep. Through creation. So when you define a system, these people are the smart people, the priesthood. These people are the shudras or the niggas. As my black friend said, don't use the R, that's okay if you use the niggas, yeah. Okay? That's okay, right? Those people should not create. They just clean the toilets for us. They can pick coconut trees, which is what my caste was supposed to do. Yeah. So you deny everyone else the opportunity to create and you reserve it for the few, the Brahmins, or the people who go to MIT in the military-industrial complex. This is a denial of you and your humanity.
And
the
your
invention of
independence.
email is not about me, but it's about that 14-year-old boy in Newark, New Jersey, who busted his ass, who came from nothing, who came from a low caste, who represents every other person on this planet who has a right to innovate. That's what the invention of email is really about. And their denial, their hatred, the same hatred that that woman who wouldn't give me that water, the same hatred of the woman who would shoo my mother as a pig. That's that same hatred. And these people are the most racist, hatred, fascist people. And they call themselves liberals, right? They call themselves the intelligent folks who want to help the darkie. They want to help the darkie under their triangle.
Yeah.
I can be on the front page of MIT when I do things within their control. But when I say email was not done by you and I fight for that, that even bothers him even more. Deepak Chopra is allowed. You see, Gandhi is okay. Shake your head, talk like this, talk about, spirituality, talk about nonviolence. But when you speak aggressively and you get angry, that's not allowed.
Yeah.
Right? So the invention of email is really about the fact that email is a system. It's not a reductionist thing of sending. That's why the systems approach is important. It's about the fact that I went through the real American journey of coming from nothing, through the process of immigration, through the process of education, through innovation. This is a process that our founders went through.
Yeah.
And they want to deny that. So the denial of so that's why it's extremely important to document the truth about the history of email, because it's not just about the truth of this. It exposes the branding and the viciousness of the multi-trillion-dollar enterprise of the military-industrial complex, which wants to brainwash people for us to fuel them, because they want us to make us think that you fuel war and you get innovation. Give us money and we'll give you a cell phone.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it's really about. It's fundamentally about humanity and dehumanizing it. Because the truth is that email came out of a civilian application to help these secretaries who were also humans to give them a gateway into the world of computing. Email was the first consumer application which took a woman. In many ways, email would not have been created out of women. My grandmother inspired me, Stella Alexiak, who changed the rules, my mom who did, and those women. Email is a liberation of women in some ways.
Yeah.
It took the women from the computer, it took the desktop out of a physical space into this etheric space. So you didn't have to physically be in one location. And email's still the killer app. So that's why I think this episode, Marcelo, is a good one to start with. And I know you think politically, I don't know how, you're under the age of 40. I think many people in your era may not even know where email came from.
Yeah, they have no idea.
Yeah.
Until actually reading the 40-page paper, you get a full understanding of what email actually is.
Right. And what's interesting, you can be a dropout out of Harvard. That's cool. So Bill Gates, by the way, the guy didn't invent DOS. He stole it from a guy. You know the story of Bill Gates, right?
Yeah, this is a repeated pattern of
right.
people
But
stealing.
but you can be a dropout of
people's
Harvard,
invention.
but he made gazillions, you see. You can be a dropout like Zuckerberg. But the reality is, if I had made gazillions of dollars, they would revere me. Why didn't I make gazillions? And this gets back to politics, because the stupid politicians in Congress, it took them until 1994 to recognize that software is a digital machine. They thought software was paper. Right? If they had appropriately allowed me to patent software in 1980, I'd be a gazillionaire, probably one of the wealthiest guys on the planet.
Yeah.
Because the protection that copyright gives us for the literal code, it doesn't protect all the ideas I did.
Yeah.
So this is another important issue about why we need people who actually build things and make things in Congress, because these morons in Congress don't understand technology. They don't even understand Google and Facebook. They don't understand they don't even understand what laws to create to protect the hypermedia. They don't understand how to protect artists in the world of 3D printing.
Yep.
There are so many new technologies coming out. The morons in Congress, except probably one out of, like a Rand Paul or someone like that, it's reprehensible what's going on to the representation of the American people. They're not being protected because these people don't even understand the implications of new technologies.
The only ones that are being protected are the military-industrial complex.
Exactly.
Special interests of the lobbyists.
Exactly.
That's all it is.
Yeah. So the denial of the invention of email at a fundamental level is a denial. Or the truth about the invention, the denial of the truth is a denial of you and your humanity
and your independence.
Yeah. The fact is, you don't need a lot of equipment. You don't need VC funding. I mean, we'll do a whole thing just on how innovation is being farmed, just like genetically engineered foods now. It's being totally controlled.
Yeah.
You go to MIT, then you get to go to Kendall Square, then you get your VC funding, then you're an innovator, right?
You've got to be part of the military-industrial
right. You got
to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope this was valuable to you. I don't know if there's any other points you want to bring up.
No, I think that was it. I think we covered everything.
I think the takeaway from this episode is innovation anytime, any place, by anybody. That's what this is really about. And by the way, I created a nonprofit in the middle of this called Innovation Core, where I recognize young kids between the age of 14 to 18 who are innovative, not invented, but made something that they've converted. That's an invention that they've actually selling or commercialized, getting out to people. This past year we recognized 4 kids. Last year 8 kids. I give them about $1,000. I'm there to mentor them. It's a very small way. It's by no means like the National Science Foundation. So anyone listening to this podcast, if you know people, go to innovationcore.org.
That's what we're missing is more innovation from
we need more innovation. We need to spur young local innovators. There was a time when the government would say, give people money. Oh, whoever created the fastest aircraft. Now it's all owned and collusion. I'm sorry, MIT gets some smart people, but they're not the only smart people on the planet. MIT was lucky to get me. I didn't want to go there. I think it was good I went there because I know the bowels of the hypocrisy of the military-industrial complex, how they control narratives, how they have this elite system.
Yeah, that was your purpose to go.
That was my purpose.
To learn that.
Yeah, that's what I learned.
Yeah.
So it's probably a very valuable thing.
Definitely. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.